Chapter 149. All right, what do you think we should do now? Jilin thought about the fact that he didn't have a real body and decided to listen to Aisha's suggestion. When bandits weren't strong enough, they naturally had to be flexible and couldn't force their way through. Even if they had to suffer a little, it was all for the sake of living. Even Li Sun understood this. According to the information that Xiaohei just sent back, there's a city pass not far from our southeast. Aisha said, "We can disguise ourselves as merchant carriages and sneak in, then quickly pass through the city pass. But it won't be so easy for the cavalry behind us to pass through the city pass. It's the humans' own city. Can't they let humans pass through?" Jilin asked curiously. Think about it. Ever since the mythological era, the orcs have never attacked the Nanshin Empire, even once. Since that's the case, why didn't the Nanshin Empire build the city pass directly on the border instead of on the main roads within the empire? A city built by humans is meant to defend against humans, Aisha said with a mocking tone. Aisha was right. The various human empires had very strict regulations for their armies. If a fully armed cavalry troop wanted to pass through the city pass, they would need very complicated documents and procedures. And to prepare these things, it would take at least 1 or 2 days. By then, Aisha and Jilin would probably have to run into the wasteland, but humans had another saying that was very reasonable. There are no absolutes in doing things. Because Mu Yunshun, whom Jilin casually killed, had a more powerful background than Aisha had imagined. Thus, things went beyond Aisha's expectations. In order to ensure that the bandits who killed Mr. Mu were caught, the general of the Beast Army did not hesitate to use the precious magic message that could only be used when transmitting the highest level battle report. Even when the cavalry scouts discovered Aisha's carriage, the style of their carriage had already spread throughout the Nanshin Empire's military. Thus, all the city passes in the south of the Nanshin Empire already knew that it was 2 people in a carriage who killed Mu Yinshin, and the orders given by the higher-ups were to kill them on the spot if they were confident. If they weren't, they were to feign civility. The pass that Aisha and the others were going to was called Jintang Pass. What he obtained was the meaning of being impregnable. The general of Jintang Pass was called Lu Yuan. Currently, Lu Yuan was sitting in the main hall of Jintang Pass, pondering over the matter of young Master Mu's death. He didn't think as much as the cavalry commander. He was only calculating how much benefit the Mu clan would give him if he could capture the madman who had killed young Master Mu, Fang Jun. Lu Yuan pondered for a long time, then suddenly slammed the table and called out loudly, "General!" A general immediately ran in from outside and bowed in salute. "Go and inform the brothers that today is the day off. Call them back. You must ensure that all soldiers are in the barracks on standby." Lu Yuan said. "Yes." Fang Jun answered and ran out. Seeing that Fang Jun had left, Lu Yuan heaved a sigh of relief. Just as he was looking at the ceiling and imagining his beautiful future, Lu Yuan suddenly heard a voice. A soldier rushed in, reporting, "General, the carriage you sent earlier has appeared." "Really?" Lu Yuan stood up and looked at the soldier in disbelief. He didn't expect that he would encounter such a good thing that fell from the sky. "It's absolutely true." The soldier said, "Should we take them down directly or capture them alive? Please give us your orders. How many of them are there?" Lu Yuan still couldn't believe that she had such good luck, so she asked another question cautiously. "Just as the report said, there are 2 of them. Since there are only 2 of them, let's let them in first. We'll try to capture them alive and hand them over to the Mu clan for punishment." Lu Yuan smiled, then said sinisterly, "Killing a young master of the Mu clan won't be easy even if you want to die. Then may I ask, General, how many brothers should we send this time? Is there need to ask?" "All of them." "All of them? There are only 2 of them. Even if they are level 7 or 8. Isn't this making a mountain out of a molehill?" "Idiot. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get promoted and make a fortune. We're all brothers normally, so we can't leave anyone behind at this time. So that's how it is. General's great kindness. We thank you on behalf of our brothers." "Ha ha ha ha. You've worked so hard for me, so when I have the chance, I'll make sure you get promoted and make a fortune." "Thank you, General. Aisha quickly drove the carriage to Jintang Pass. Aisha frowned slightly and glanced behind her. She could feel that the cavalry behind her had been maintaining a certain distance, not too far or too close behind her. Even when she was about to reach Jintang Pass, they didn't make any special movements. Aisha felt that it was strange that they hadn't caught up after so long. But since she was already at Jintang Pass, she had to enter no matter what. Aisha made up her mind and urged the undead warhorse forward slowly. The road before Jintang Pass wasn't wide, and there were some weeds growing on it. There were only 2 or 3 people on the road, making it seem somewhat desolate. It was a border military formation and not a town where commoners lived, so it was normal. Therefore, Aisha didn't suspect anything and slowly rode through the gate. "What are you doing?" The guard at the gate, who was in charge of checking the pedestrians, asked weakly. "We're just a passing chamber of commerce. We're mainly merchants who transport medicinal herbs." Aisha's lie was flawless. Aisha took out a merchant's token from her waist and took out a wooden box from the carriage. She opened it and showed it to the soldier. It was filled with medicinal herbs. "All right, go on." The soldier only glanced at it and nodded, easily letting them pass. At the front lines, merchants who sold medicinal herbs were the most common. They were also the most popular merchants among the soldiers. They transported medicinal herbs from the interior and sold them at the border. They sold them at a very low price because they didn't make much money, but mainly to earn a good reputation. The main point was to use the money from the medicinal herbs to buy the spoils of war of the soldiers at a low price. The soldiers were a group of straightforward people. They brought medicinal herbs from thousands of miles away and saved many of their comrades who were seriously injured. Some of them were even half-doctors and had saved countless lives on the battlefield. These people took a fancy to the trinkets you picked up on the battlefield and offer price. Which man would have the face to bargain? These people naturally wouldn't make things difficult for the soldiers. Aisha entered the city according to her plan. She thought that as long as she passed through 11 more gates, she would reach the wilderness. Aisha entered the city and didn't stop. She planned to go straight through the city. But when they walked to the center of the city, Aisha suddenly realized that the people around them seemed to be moving away from them at the same time. Aisha turned her eyes and closed her eyes to sense the surrounding streets. When he opened his eyes, he sighed with some annoyance. Staying together with an invincible existence like Qi Lin, he had unknowingly become careless. Sure enough, it was as if the heavens had confirmed Aisha's conjecture. Just as Aisha thought of that, countless fully armed soldiers rushed out from the surrounding rooms. They surrounded the 2 horse carriages in an instant. Countless spears and arrows were aimed at the horse carriages. Of course, such small rooms couldn't hide so many soldiers. The only possibility was that these rooms had been built to hide the soldiers. Ha 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 ha! A burst of complacent laughter came from the middle of the soldiers. Those thieves who killed young Master Mu, I had thought that they were some powerful people. It turns out that they are just 2 stupid thieves. Aisha narrowed her eyes. Her gaze was as cold as a knife. She had lived for over 200 years since she was a child. No one had ever called her stupid. Jilin stuck his head out from the horse carriage and looked at Aisha with a playful expression. What he meant was, "Look at your plan, it's great." Oomph. Aisha snorted hatefully. People often say that if you walk by the river, your shoes will eventually get wet. But she never thought that she would lose so much face in front of Jilin the moment her shoes got wet. "Who are you?" Aisha asked loudly. "I am the general of Jintang Pass, Lu Yuan." Lu Yuan's voice was like a loud bell. He pushed aside the soldiers and walked in front of Jilin and Aisha. He wasn't underestimating his opponents. He simply didn't believe that these 2 people could hurt him when surrounded by so many soldiers. As long as the 2 of them made any strange movements, the beast-destroying crossbows, which were specially designed to deal with beastmen, would shoot thousands of arrows. As long as they weren't 9th-level diamond-ranked experts, they wouldn't be able to withstand such a rain of arrows. This was Lu Yuan's confidence. "Thieves, hurry up and get out of the carriage. What are you waiting for?" Lu Yuan shouted. He was very excited as he saw that the opportunity for a meteoric rise was in his hands. Jilin still looked at Aisha mockingly. Aisha finally lowered her head and waved weakly at him. What she meant was, "Go ahead if you can." Jilin grinned, revealing a row of dazzling white teeth. It was like a gust of wind. Jilin disappeared from the carriage. But in the next moment, Jilin appeared beside Lu Yuan, holding Lu Yuan's head in his hand. Lu Yuan, who was held in Jilin's hand, was still as proud as ever. He was still full of hope for the future. In other words, he didn't even realize what had happened until he died. And from the jagged wounds on his neck, his head had clearly been forcefully torn off. Even so, Lu Yuan didn't even feel the pain before he died. From this, one could imagine how fast Jilin was. All the soldiers forgot to move. They looked at Jilin as though they were looking at a ghost. Aisha looked at Jilin, who was standing among the enemy soldiers, holding the enemy general's head and suppressing the enemy soldiers to the point that they didn't dare to move. She suddenly remembered a saying. It was a saying used by the Middle Empire to describe valiant generals. It was somewhat exaggerated. It was called taking the head of a general from tens of thousands of soldiers as easy as taking something out of one's pocket. It was indeed a bit exaggerated to use this saying to describe human generals. But if it was used to describe the current Jilin, it was appropriate. Chapter 150. Jilin's human appearance was not that outstanding. He could only be described as a somewhat delicate and bashful boy next door. Perhaps in the eyes of others, he did have a special characteristic. That is, he was clean. One look at him, and they would be able to tell that he was clean. Too clean, because no filth could land on Jilin's body. However, such a clean and delicate-looking youngster was standing in the middle of a group of soldiers who had experienced hundreds of battles. He was holding a head in his hand. This scene appeared to be the perfect combination of cleanliness and blood. It was incomparably strange and terrifying. Jilin looked at the surrounding soldiers who were looking at him as though they had seen a ghost. He then said softly, "There is no need for you to be afraid." Seeing Jilin say those words in such a calm manner, the soldiers felt a chill running from the soles of their feet to the top of their heads. They could not help but tremble a few times. Who would not be afraid? As Jilin was saying those words, he was holding a head in his hand. Fang Jun was originally standing beside Lu Yuan. Now he was standing closest to Jilin. He could clearly see the expression on General Lu Yuan's face. He could even clearly see the jagged wound on the general's neck. The general's expression was still so high-spirited. It appeared as though he did not even know how he had died. He did not know if it was a blessing or a misfortune. The general's bold words of wanting to lead everyone to promotion and wealth rang out in his ears. The general's heroic face was still vivid in his mind. However, the general had died, just like that. Fang Jun watched as the general's head was held in the hands of that man. He made up his mind and took a deep breath. Then he shouted, "Kill! Avenge the general!" The moment he took a deep breath, Jilin had already noticed him. The distance between them was too close. Jilin casually raised his hand and pointed his index finger at Fang Jun's glabella. He then said softly, "You're not bad." After Jilin said that, a red beam of light shot out from his index finger. It pierced through Fang Jun's glabella. A hole appeared on Fang Jun's glabella. Fang Jun's body fell straight to the ground. In the blink of an eye, from the moment Fang Jun shouted to the moment he died, the surrounding soldiers didn't even have time to react, or rather, that they didn't want to react. No soldier was willing to fight a battle they were sure to lose. I didn't want to kill them either. They were the ones who wanted to harm me. Jilin actually complained first. Hearing this, the surrounding soldiers were stunned. "I just want to pass." Jilin's yellowish eyes swept across everyone. It clearly expressed the meaning of "whoever dares to stop me will die." The surrounding soldiers looked at each other in bewilderment. They could see the intention to retreat hidden in the eyes of their companions. It was unknown who was the first to put down their weapons. Slowly, like a spreading fire, everyone put down their weapons and silently turned to leave. Jilin stood where he was and didn't move. Seeing these people walking back in a daze, he nodded in satisfaction. As expected, most humans were still afraid of death. The saying, "to catch bandits, first catch the ringleader," was true. If these soldiers weren't afraid of death and risked their lives to fight him, Jilin really didn't have the confidence to keep the carriage safe. Jilin didn't realize that from a human's point of view, no matter how one looked at it, he was the bandit. Jilin walked back to the carriage and sat beside Aisha. He looked back into the carriage and smiled at Aisha. How was it? Oomph. Aisha snorted and ignored him. He continued to drive the horse carriage on the empty street. Not long after, they left Jintang Pass without any disturbances. Where are we going next? Jilin asked with great interest. Dongling Pass. Aisha said. This one again? According to the route, if we want to reach the wasteland, we have to pass through 12 passes like this one. Is that so? Jilin nodded, looking very happy. Dongling Pass. In the main hall of Dongling Pass, a person wearing a general's uniform was reporting to General Chenglin about what happened at Jintang Pass. General, there's news from Jintang Pass. The two people who killed young Master Mu have already passed through Jintang Pass and are heading towards our Dongling Pass. How did they enter Jintang Pass? Chenglin slammed the table and shouted with a ferocious expression. According to our information, it was General Liu himself who let them in. Chenglin couldn't help but hold his forehead and sigh painfully when he heard this. Liu Yuan was fond of grandiose achievements. This wasn't a secret in this area. It looked like Liu Yuan had messed up this time. Since they entered Jintang Pass, Liu Yuan must have set up a trap. But these two still came out. Chenglin pondered and rubbed his chin. He asked in a low voice, how many people died at Jintang Pass? Only General Liu Yuan and Deputy General Fang Jun. This. Chenglin stood up abruptly, his eyes filled with shock. He didn't think that Liu Yuan would die, and die in his own pass. General, I heard that those two people will be here soon. What should we do? Liu Yuan was too careless. Chenglin said with some regret. He actually took the initiative to lead a wolf into the house. There's always someone better than him in this world. General, then we can't follow Liu Yuan's example. Chenglin said firmly, we'll just block them outside the pass. Our Dongling Pass is different from Jintang Pass. Our terrain is easy to defend and hard to attack. We won't leave the pass. As long as they dare to approach the pass, we'll shoot. It's best to shoot them to death. Even if they don't die, it's fine. Otherwise, they'll just enter the pass. Yes, General, the soldier replied. At the same time, he couldn't help but think the general is really panicking. There are only two people, not an army. What terrain is easy to defend and hard to attack? Where can't two people go? His general is good at everything, but he's a bit too careful. However, this kind of person is the best general for guarding the pass. We're almost there, Dongling Pass. Aisha drove the carriage slowly towards Dongling Pass. Do you think the humans will let us enter the city directly this time? Jilin asked. I don't know, we'll have to see. Aisha said. See what? Jilin asked. As the carriage got closer and closer, Aisha could already see the city pass clearly. The city gates were tightly shut without any gaps. The soldiers on the city walls were patrolling everywhere. They were fully armed and waiting for the enemy. Suddenly, one of the soldiers on the city walls seemed to have seen Aisha's undisguised carriage. Like a monkey, he nimbly climbed up the watchtower and madly rang the golden gong in the watchtower. In an instant, the ear-piercing sound of the gong rang through every corner of Dongling Pass. The soldiers ran to the battlements and knocked their arrows, aiming at the carriage. That's what we're looking at. Aisha glanced at Jilin. Jilin looked at the people in front of him who were ready to fight. For some reason, he suddenly felt that humans were an eyesore. Don't you think that there are too many humans in this world? It's so crowded that I can't breathe. Jilin asked. Aisha didn't know why Jilin suddenly brought this up, but she still replied, a little. At the same time, she couldn't help but complain in her heart. You're a dragon, and you're still playing with words with me? I don't know what Staya is thinking, teaching you these useless things. If only there were less than half of them. Jilin said with melancholy. Aisha was a little confused. What's wrong with him today? Why don't you just say that we should exterminate the humans? Aisha glanced at Jilin unhappily. Exterminating the species is something that only Father God can do. Jilin said seriously, just like what was written in Staya's book, There are countless demons hiding in the dark underground. They've been scheming to exterminate the humans, but they haven't succeeded. In the end, Father God just casually made it rain, and it was done. Aisha was a little speechless. She didn't know why these things were written in the sacred book of light. She had lived for more than 200 years. As a witch whose destiny was to learn, she must have read all the famous books in the world. However, she had never read the sacred book of light, which was the most famous book in the continent, which was everywhere. Listening to Jilin's explanation, she seemed to understand why the Pope, as the head of the Church of Light, did not worship God. While Jilin and Aisha were chatting, the carriage was still moving forward steadily, neither increasing nor decreasing its speed. It didn't change because of the soldiers' hostility. Soon, the carriage entered the range of the arrows. Suddenly, the arrows rained down. The soldiers of East Ridge Pass did not hesitate. Countless sharp swords were shot. With Jilin's ability, he could of course instantly determine which arrows would hit and which would not. He used the fire element in the air to ignite the arrows that threatened the carriage. Thus, a strange scene appeared. Countless arrows enveloped the carriage, but not a single one could touch the carriage. Before they could touch the carriage, they were completely burned into dust. What was it like to pass through a field of flowers, but not a single leaf touched the body? What was it like to be able to move unhindered in the midst of the crossfire of arrows and stones? This was it. At this moment, the carriage was like a small sailboat that could sail steadily in the midst of a violent storm and raging waves. It didn't even sway. It was completely unreasonable. Just like that, the carriage calmly arrived at the city gate. Jilin jumped off the carriage, walked to the city gate, and casually threw out a punch. A loud boom sounded. The soldiers standing on the city wall only felt the earth shake. The city gate below actually broke into two and flew out 1 to 200 meters. It landed on the main road of East Ridge Pass. The city gate of East Ridge Pass, compared to the palace gate of the Middle Empire, was of course far inferior. Jilin shook his wrist and turned to nod lightly at Aisha. Aisha didn't want to say anything. Thus, the carriage slowly entered the city. Please recommend me. Collect. Thank you. Chapter 151. Lin sat in the main hall of Eastern Ridge Pass, silently calculating when the reinforcements from the Empire would arrive. If the thieves realized that they couldn't enter Eastern Ridge Pass and turned to leave, should she send people to chase after them or just let them go? Lu Yuan died because of her carelessness. With that lesson in front of her, she had no choice but to be cautious. Just as Lin was pondering to herself, the ground suddenly quaked and the mountains shook. However, the tremors left as quickly as they came. Lin felt as if she had been shaken by someone. What's wrong? Is it the earth dragon turning over? Lin asked around. Report. A soldier shouted and rushed into main hall. Was the tremor just now caused by the earth dragon turning over? Lin asked again. General, it's not. The soldier seemed to be a little hesitant. Then what's going on? Tell me. Lin said. It's the thieves who sent the gate flying, causing the tremors. The soldier said with a trembling voice. What did you say? Lin doubted his ears. Sent the gate flying? Yes, the soldier stuttered. How? With his hands. Sent the gate flying with his bare hands? Lin's voice rose a few octaves. Yes. How far did it fly? More than 100 meters. Is he still human? Lin was silent for a moment, then let out a howl. General, the thieves have already entered the pass. How should we deal with them? The soldier asked. Our brothers are all waiting for your orders. They don't dare to act rashly. How should we deal with them? Lin paused, thinking, how can we deal with them? Even if all the soldiers in Eastern Ridge Pass attacked together, they would be like moths to a flame. He looked at the soldier and said, did the thieves kill any civilians or soldiers in the pass? No, the soldier said. Then ignore them. Lin said in a low voice, if they want to pass, then let them pass. The soldier exclaimed. He didn't expect the general to let them go so easily. This was at least the general's territory. This was Eastern Ridge Pass. The general was the commander of Eastern Ridge Pass. No matter what, he had to put on an act. A what? Chung Lin slammed the table and glared. The orders from above are to kill him on the spot, if you're confident. If you're not, then feign civility. I am abiding by military orders. It wasn't a coward. What happened? Could it be that you have the confidence to kill those two on the spot? If you think you can do it, then go ahead. I definitely won't stop you. Although the soldier felt that there was a huge difference between feigning civility and directly releasing the prisoner, he still quickly and firmly shook his head. He definitely didn't have the confidence to do so. After all, the feeling of the city gate flying over his head was 2F king scary. At least you know what's good for you, Chung Lin said angrily. Tell the people at Huku Pass and Jinling Pass that the enemy's strength is unfathomable, and they can't fight against him. Yes, between the wilderness of the Beastmen and the grasslands of the Nanshin Empire, there was a large piece of flat land where not even a blade of grass grew. Because there were white bones scattered everywhere, humans called it the White Bone Battlefield. The Orcs, on the other hand, called it the Plain of Heroic Spirits. This plain was the battlefield where the Beastmen and humans had been fighting since ancient times. The bones scattered all over the place belonged to the Beastmen who died in battle, and there were no bones of humans. Because after every battle, humans would specially collect the bones of the warriors and clean up the battlefield. But the Beastmen didn't have this habit. The Beastmen believed that the warriors who died on the battlefield should always stay on the battlefield. They should just lie there in broad daylight. Let the heavens, let their ancestors, and let everyone bear witness. That was the glory of the Beastmen. As for being buried in the ground after death like humans, never to see the light of day, just thinking about it made the Beastmen feel so sullen that they couldn't breathe. Only ants, mice, and other creatures that the Beastmen despised in their bones would burrow into the ground for no reason. In life, there was a sacrifice. In life, there was a house. And in death, there was a roof above one's head. This was a unique need of humans. Humans always instinctively avoided being directly exposed to the heavens. Even if they had to sleep in the wild, they had to find a tree shade or a cave. This was the reverence humans had for the heavens. Because the heavens were too wide, too wide. Looking at it made people panic. Because when humans looked at this incomparably vast sky, they could always easily realize how small they were. It was easy to make people doubt in life. War for this plane was a very common thing that happened every day. Even during the so-called truce period of the Beastmen, there would still be small groups of Beastmen harassing humans. For the Beastmen, fighting was an instinct, a habit, something they did casually when they had nothing to do, and also a release when their bloodthirsty desire couldn't be suppressed. It was as common as how humans like to take a few steps after dinner. Therefore, the wars in the past were not wars at all for the Beastmen. It was only a custom, a routine to welcome the new Beast King, or even to relax. But this time was different. This war was a true war in the eyes of the Beastmen. All the Beastmen tribes had spontaneously gathered on this battlefield. The battlefield stretched for hundreds of miles. Their war stretched as far as the eye could see. The momentum of the Beastmen was unprecedented. Therefore, the Southern Exine Empire also began to prepare for battle. When the Beastmen had just started to gather, the Southern Exine Empire judged that the hidden Beast Army could repel this attack. When the Beastmen gathered 200,000 to 300,000, the Southern Exine Empire transferred the Iron Feather Army and the Dragon Subduing Army from the east and west. When the Beastmen gathered 500,000 to 600,000, the warlord personally brought the King Exine Army from the center of the Southern Exine Empire. Moreover, the warlord also felt that this was a great opportunity to stabilize the rear. When the Beastmen gathered 700,000 to 800,000, the warlord finally made up his mind and transferred the Archer Army from the north. At this point, all the forces of the Southern Exine Empire were concentrated in the south. A total of 7 million. This was the power of an empire. The warlord made up his mind to win this war with an absolute advantage. This way, the Southern Exine Empire's casualties would be minimized, and they could prepare for the crusade against the Red Disaster in the future. For this, the warlord temporarily gave up on guarding against the other human empires, and now, according to the military intelligence of the Southern Exine Empire, the number of beastmen gathered on the bone battlefield had exceeded 3 million, or even more. This time, even the warlord wasn't sure of victory. Thus, he clenched his teeth and wrote a letter to the Simi Empire, the Middle Empire, and the Church of Light. He even issued a war mission in the name of the Empire in the Adventurers Guild. As for the Snowwind Empire, the warlord didn't write it because it was too far away. If they didn't move their cities, the army definitely wouldn't be able to come over. As for the Snowwind Empire's mobile cities, it was said that they had all been damaged in the Battle of Snowfire. As for the Divine Dragon Empire, it was said that the church that Flay had founded had been suppressed by the Divine Dragon Empire. Now, this legendary expert had personally led her believers in an uprising. Oh no, uprising was what the Middle Empire called it. According to the Divine Dragon Empire, it should be called a revolution. The warlord didn't know what had provoked these beastmen to make such a desperate move, leaving no room for negotiation. However, this wasn't important. He only knew that this war would definitely be an unprecedented war. It would be passed down for generations to come. This was because no matter who won or lost this war, it would have a far-reaching impact. If the Southern Exine Empire won, not only would the beastmen be exterminated, but there wouldn't be any beastmen on the borders of the Southern Exine Empire for at least 300 to 500 years. It could be said that it would be done once and for all. Now, the warlord had the support of 2 great empires, the Church of Light, and countless adventurers. He was confident that his chances of winning were very high. However, if the beastmen won, the warlord didn't want to think about it anymore. In any case, he would definitely die when the time came. What was the point of thinking so much? The warlord wasn't the only one who was racking his brains and feeling puzzled. Why were these beastmen suddenly risking their lives? Even the previous Beast King, Sing, was currently staying in the Beast King's tent all day, sighing and worrying. He could only watch helplessly as the tribes brought their luggage and families out of their encampments. They came to this battlefield. He wanted to stop them, but he didn't know what to say. The beastmen didn't have the concept of mediating. These beastmen looked like they had brought all their belongings with them. It seemed like they planned to move directly after this battle and occupy the Southern Exine Empire. Sing, who could fight with the King of Fighters, Musin, actually felt like crying at this moment. He seriously doubted whether his fellow beastmen had brains. Crazy. Crazy. The entire beastmen race seems to have gone crazy. The Dwarf King lifted the curtain of the tent and walked in angrily. He had gone to help Sing understand the situation among the beastmen. In human terms, he was just trying to get information. It couldn't be helped. He was very popular among the beastmen now, with the Dwarf King's skills that had been passed down for generations. As long as he casually showed his skills and gave the beastmen a few unconventional weapons, those beastmen would tell him everything they knew. What's the situation? Sing suddenly raised his head and looked at the Dwarf King. Haha. The Dwarf King gave Sing a thumbs up and shook his head. He said in an extremely exaggerated tone, "You beastmen are really awesome. I talked to dozens of beastmen just now, but none of them took the human army of nearly 2 million seriously. The beastmen race is indeed the most valiant race in the world. At least the dwarf race is ashamed of our inferiority." Sing closed his eyes in despair. He was now convinced that his fellow beastmen were brainless. At the beginning of the month, the new author shamelessly and humbly asked for a wave of recommendation votes and bookmarks. Thank you, everyone. I promise that I will try my best to keep updating this month. Whisper, finally, if everyone really didn't want to give a recommendation vote or bookmark, then they could just type "definitely next time" in the comments. Chapter 152. What the hell is going on? The Dwarf King asked, puzzled. Previously, when Jilin wasn't around, you, the former Orc King, didn't do anything. Why did the entire Orc race spontaneously come to war? Who's the one who started this? This isn't a matter of who started it, Sing said with a pained expression. In the Orc race, Even the Orc King can't summon the entire Orc race to fight this kind of war. Yes, this war was not a long-planned plan by a certain Orc. It was the common will of the entire Orc race. Even Sing and the Dwarf King did not come on their own initiative. It was because of a tradition of the Orc race. When the Orc race launched a war with more than 100,000 people, the Beast God Mountain had to go to the battlefield. Then what's going on? The Dwarf King asked. Did all the Orc race go crazy at the same time? And why didn't you stop them? You're the former Orc King. Why? Don't you have any prestige after retiring? Who said I didn't stop them? Sing was flustered and exasperated. These days, if I hadn't organized and reorganized the army, those idiots would have rushed up and fought to the death with the humans. Then can't you let the Orc race go back? The Dwarf King frowned and asked. If there's going to be a war, now is not the time. We're not ready. Of course I know. Sing could not control himself. He slammed the table. Kacha! The wooden table that was as thick as a palm instantly split into pieces. But I couldn't stop them. Sing howled. In the end, why did all the Orc tribes fight this war at this time? The Dwarf King asked. This is because there's a legend in the Orc race. Sing sighed. It seemed like he wanted to start a long story. When the Dwarf King heard this vulgar beginning, he could not help but sneer in his heart. He thought, which race doesn't have two legends? My dwarf race even has a legend. But how many of them can be taken seriously? This matter starts with the 36th High Priest of the Orc race. The 36th High Priest is the greatest High Priest in the history of the Orcs because, Sing said slowly, as if his voice contained the weight of history. Wait a moment. The Dwarf King abruptly interrupted him. Which generation is the current High Priest of the Beastmen? The 207th generation. Sing said, do you have to start from such a long time ago? The Dwarf King looked at Sing and asked seriously. Sing glared at the Dwarf King, indicating that he should respect the history of the Orcs more. Then he continued, the High Priest of the Beastmen tribe has been the chief of the Eaglemen tribe for generations. It's said that the eyes of the Eaglemen can see through yin and yang and predict the future. Isn't this a little too exaggerated? The Dwarf King asked hesitantly. Things like foreseeing the future and seeing through yin and yang sounded extremely mysterious, like something a human swindler would say. No. Sing shook his head slowly. The High Priest prophecies are sometimes not very important. However, as long as the High Priest makes a prophecy, it will always come true. This is using the naked eye to do the things of the gods. The Dwarf King exclaimed. Yes, that's why the High Priest prophecies come at the cost of his life. Sing said, that's why as long as it's an Orc, no one will doubt the High Priest prophecies. Then would the 36th High Priest prophesy? The Dwarf King asked. The High Priest prophesied that countless years later, an incomparably great megalosaurus will appear in the world. He's the representative of power and fire. He's the true king of the Orcs. He'll lead the Orcs out of the wilderness and rise from then on. His fire will rise from the west all the way to the endless sea. At that time, the Orcs will be incomparably glorious. Sing said slowly with a solemn expression, his voice filled with a sense of history. It felt like Staya was holding the holy book of light and reading it with full concentration. The Dwarf King understood. The reason why the Orcs were like this was because they had a new Orc king, the holy megalosaurus, Jilin. When Jilin flew from the Beast God Mountain to the capital of the Middle Empire, he had revealed his true form above the Beast God Mountain. It was very eye-catching. The Beast God Mountain was in the center of the Orcs. At that time, many Orc tribes must have seen Jilin's figure. Later on, it was said that many Orcs knelt down at that time. No wonder Sing looked at Jilin's figure with a face full of hesitation. So that's why? The Orcs all knew that a megalosaurus had become their Orc king. Without saying anything, they felt that the High Priest's prophecy was about to come true. It was already the historical moment of the Orcs' glorious rise. Therefore, they couldn't help but follow the will of the heavens. What a bunch of hot-blooded idiots. The Dwarf King sighed in his heart. But Jilin isn't here now. Are we going to fight, even if the king isn't here? The Dwarf King asked. That's not important at all. Sing said faintly. Oh, I understand, the Dwarf King said faintly. It turned out that in the hearts of the orcs, Jilin wasn't some invincible fighting force, nor was he a commander with a perfect plan. The orcs didn't need him to lead them. In the hearts of the orcs, he was just a symbol, a signal that the orcs could start an all-out war with the humans, a signal that the orcs could completely free themselves. Once he appeared, the orcs would start a war. It was that simple. Moreover, looking at the attitude of the orcs, they had been waiting for this day for a long time. Then how much longer can you delay? The Dwarf King asked with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Hee. Sing's laughter was full of despair, as if he was ready to break a broken pot. The war will start this afternoon. Sing said. What? The Dwarf King suddenly stood up and stared at Sing. How can it be so fast? Sing rubbed his smooth mane twice and said weakly, I've tried my best. Previously, I could still use the excuse of waiting for the other tribes to arrive to delay for a few days. But now, the number of orcs has exceeded 1 million. I can't wait any longer. Do we really have to fight? The Dwarf King still didn't give up. Sing closed his eyes and nodded painfully. Then after this war, how many of these 1 million orcs will be left? The Dwarf King asked. If we don't care about the cost, the best estimate is that the orcs will lose 400,000 to 500,000. Sing said painfully. How can that be? The Dwarf King's voice was full of shock. Isn't it said that an orc warrior can fight against 3 humans of the same level? That's right, Sing said. But the weapons and equipment of the humans are also far superior to ours. The Dwarf King was silent. He had no right to speak on this issue. As the leader of the dwarf race, he had never worried about weapons and equipment. Sing looked at his majestic body and mighty appearance. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. He suddenly remembered a human saying. It was called, help a building that is about to collapse, turn the tide that is about to fall. This was such a good saying. Now, the orcs were like a building that was about to collapse in his eyes. He really wanted to help them. However, he clearly knew that he couldn't do anything. At the end of the day, helping a building that was about to collapse was just a rhetorical technique called exaggeration. How could there be so many miracles that could turn the tide? Most of the people who wanted to help a building that was about to collapse were crushed to death by the building. Just as Sing and the Dwarf King were silent, suddenly, there was a loud noise from outside the tent. Sing was shocked. He silently calculated the time in his heart and said slowly, It's time. They're about to start. Yes, the war was about to start. Chapter 153. Actually, very few people had the opportunity to witness the gathering of tens of thousands of people, not to mention millions of people, because with so many people, there was no place to put them all. No matter what they wanted to do, they couldn't do it. 1 million people, even if they wanted to move a mountain, fill up the sea, they would probably have to split into 3 shifts and work one day and rest the other to use so many people they couldn't all swarm up. But now the orcs had won. 3 million people, while the human factions added together had more than 2 million. So many people. A battlefield of bones couldn't fit all of them, so the boundless army camp began to spread out. Both sides had spread to the other side of the mountains around the battlefield. From the perspective of the humans, the orcs seemed endless. Their camp had already spread to the horizon. Of course, the orcs looked at the humans in the same way. In the human camp, in the central tent, the War King was holding a piece of white linen cloth. He dipped it in some water and carefully wiped his family's heirloom war god armor. He didn't even let go of the smallest gap. Moreover, he had already wiped it 5 times. The War King's expression was incomparably solemn. It was as if he wasn't just wiping the armor. It was more like a solemn ceremony, because this was the armor that every War King had worn since the founding of the Nanshin Empire. To the War King, wiping this armor was equivalent to worshiping his ancestors. The War King believed that as long as he wore it, his ancestors would be with him. He would also be invincible. This was an unwavering belief that all the War Kings had. But now, the War King's belief was inevitably shaken. The reason was obviously because he wasn't certain of victory. This was to be expected. In a battle of millions of people, No one dared to say that they were certain of victory. The War King had never experienced such a large-scale battle. Even in the entire history of mankind, such a battle could be counted on one hand. However, he could imagine that once the battle began, all the arrangements, plans, and ambushes would definitely be useless. The only thing that could affect the outcome of the battle was the illusory morale. Reporting to Your Majesty, there's a military report. Just as the War King was lost in his thoughts, a heavy voice sounded outside the tent. The Battle King frowned. It was Meng Jian. The Battle King instantly came to a conclusion. What he couldn't understand was why there was a battle report to report to him at such a time. These days, the human camp and the orc camp could be said to be clearly separated, and there was no conflict between them. It was like the calm before the storm that could destroy the world. It was so quiet that it was somewhat oppressive and frightening. Although the warlord had no clue, he still said softly, "Come in and talk." "Yes, Your Majesty." "What is it?" "Your Majesty, there's an urgent report from the guards at the rear. 2 people rode in a carriage, and within 3 days, they passed the 12 trials of my Nanshin Empire." 12 trials? The War King raised his eyebrows, but his voice didn't fluctuate much. "How are the casualties of the soldiers guarding the trials?" "This, because the military gave the order to act according to their capabilities, so the casualties weren't that high." "Got it." The warlord gently nodded his head as he replied in an indifferent tone, although there were many problems in Meng Jian's words. For example, the abnormal orders given by the military. For example, why didn't the soldiers resist and let others pass? In wartime, this was the same as desertion. Another example would be, what kind of person could pass 12 levels in a row? However, the War King didn't ask any of these questions. These questions were usually problems, but they weren't problems right now. Now that the war that would determine the rise and fall of the empire was about to begin, how could the War King be in the mood to care about these trivial matters? Just as Meng Jian didn't know whether he should say anything else, suddenly, a deafening noise rang out from the south. The War King abruptly raised his head, and his half-closed eyes abruptly opened. His fighting spirit soared. It was as if a war blade that had been nurtured was suddenly unsheathed. The sound of metal rang out, and there was a faint sound of wind and thunder. "Put on the armor." The War King stood up and said to Meng Jian. Meng Jian didn't say anything, and silently helped the War King put on the armor. Every time the War King put on his armor before a battle, Meng Jian was the one who helped him put it on. This was because Meng Jian said that if he didn't personally help the War King put on the armor, he wouldn't feel at ease on the battlefield. Pass down the order, beat the drums. "Soldiers, get into formation," the War King said in a deep voice after putting on the armor. "Yes." Soon, the loud and heavy drums rang out rhythmically and began to spread throughout the human camp. It reverberated throughout the human camp. Countless war drums rang out in unison. When combined together, it was like a thunderclap. Even the earth trembled. The beastmen listened to the deafening drum beats and felt the earth tremble, and they became slightly quieter. It was as if only now did they realize the strength of the humans. Suddenly, an incomparably majestic lion's roar rang out, like a sudden clap of thunder in a torrential downpour, startling everyone. This lion's roar didn't seem to be at a disadvantage in the face of tens of thousands of war drums being beaten at the same time, nor was it overshadowed. Following this lion's roar, the beastmen also roared one after another. Tiger's roar, lion's roar, ape's cry, wolf's howl. The countless beastmen's cries seemed to perfectly describe a phrase, the dance of demons. The beastmen gradually began to compete with the humans in terms of sound. The beastmen warriors recalled that their side had the advantage in numbers as well. Sing stood on a small hill, rubbing his throat in pain. Even if his realm was high and the lion men were gifted in the art of sound, he had almost lost his voice from shouting just now. The Dwarf King looked at Sing with a playful expression, thinking, "The beastmen are indeed warlike. Then why did you pretend to be a pacifist in front of me with an unwilling expression?" Sing saw the contempt in the Dwarf King's eyes, so he coughed lightly, and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "I really don't want to fight because we beastmen can't afford to lose this war, but we don't have absolute confidence in winning. But I can't stop them, so if we must fight, then we might as well fight to our heart's content and give it our all. This is a once-in-a-century war, so we can't fight cowardly." "Cowering isn't the beastman's style," Singh said as he walked forward. He wanted to go to the front of the battlefield, to the center. He wanted to stand in the position of commander and give the order to all the beastmen warriors to attack the humans. Now that Jilin wasn't here, he could only stand in that position. Even if he didn't want to fight this war and didn't want to give this order, it was the same. Singh felt a little helpless at the thought of taking the lead to fight a war that he didn't want to fight. He thought to himself, the humans always say that people have no choice but to follow the rules of the world. It's really true. The dwarf king frowned, wondering why his voice had become so unpleasant. He took out a small metal ball from his pocket and handed it to Singh. "This is?" Singh took it without saying a word. The metal products in the dwarf's hand were treasures that all the creatures on the continent dreamed of. No matter what it was best to take it first. "This is the Dwarf King's special loudspeaker, called the 1,000-mile sound transmission. That is, if you speak to it from here, I guarantee that it can hear you from 1,000 miles away," the Dwarf King said proudly. Singh was a little disappointed. He thought that this was a treasure of the Dwarf King that could change the situation of the battlefield. In front of 2 armies as the commander, you have to say something, don't you think? The Dwarf King said with a smile. Singh thought for a moment and touched his neck. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said seriously, "Thank you." Chapter 154. In front of the 2 armies, the commander-in-chief had to say something. This was a rule that had existed since ancient times. These words were mainly for the warriors on his side to hear. He wanted to tell his warriors why they had to fight this battle. Those soldiers who were about to die in battle were not sacrificed for some meaningless reason. Singh stood on a mighty war chariot, holding a red broadsword that was nearly 2 meters long in one hand. There was also a huge flag behind him. That was the supreme war flag of the orc race. It fluttered in the wind. His back was straight, and his gaze was firm and deep. His eyes met the warlord's. His beautiful mane was like waves in the wind, shining with golden light. He was majestic, like a god descending to the mortal world. Singh felt that although the warlord's eyes were full of fighting spirit, there was also some hesitation. The warlord looked at Singh and felt that this beast king's face was full of reluctance, as if he was being forced to do something beyond his ability. The 2 kings looked at each other and understood. The other party was also not prepared for war, but like them, he had to start this war himself. When they thought up to here, the 2 kings couldn't help but feel a sense of sympathy for each other as they were in the same boat. However, although that was the case, but no matter how much these 2 kings thought of each other, they were in agreement. Now that the arrow was on the bow, it was impossible to say something like, "Since no one wants to fight, why don't we all retreat?" Cough, cough. The Dwarf King stood beside the war chariot and coughed softly. He reminded Singh that he and the warlord had been standing in front of the 2 armies for a long time. Without saying anything, Singh sighed secretly. The Dwarf King was right. In front of the 2 armies, as the commander-in-chief, he had to say something while Singh was organizing his words. He looked at the human camp. Front, back, left, and right, he could not see the end of any side. When he turned back to look at his own camp, it was the same. Singh thought to himself, what else can I say? No matter what I say, it's impossible for everyone to hear it. Even with the 1,000-mile telepathy, it's the same. Singh silently made up his mind. He opened the 1,000-mile telepathy and raised the supreme war flag of the orc race. He waved it down. He shouted at the 1,000-mile telepathy, "Orc warriors, charge! Crush the enemy!" Just as Singh finished his sentence, the battlefield fell silent for a whole second. No one would have thought that the order to start the war would come so suddenly. There was no foreshadowing at all. The Beastmen warriors were all thinking that he was truly worthy of being a Beast King. He was truly decisive in killing. The Battle King was also taken aback. "You're not playing by the rules. You won't even give me a chance to speak." Although the War King was stunned, as an emperor who had been on the battlefield for a long time, his body had developed an instinct to adapt. It was this instinct that caused the Battle King to reach out and wave his hand. There was a sense of calmness, as if he was immovable, allowing the wind to blow from all directions. This was also what humans often said, the temperament of a general who would remain calm even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him. Following the War King's signal, the humans' war drums sounded again. Dong, dong, dong. There was a peculiar rhythm to it. Using drums to transmit military orders was a common method used by humans. At the front of the neat formation of the human army gathered their strongest warriors. Hearing the sound of the drums, the warriors in the front row uniformly erected a solid shield wall. They were ready to meet the incoming attack. Between the gaps of the shield wall, there was a spear with a sharp tip. The tip of the spear shone with a cold light, like the fangs of a coiled snake, ready to deal a fatal blow to its prey at any time. As long as the beastmen dared to stop in front of the shield wall, they would definitely be attacked in the coldest way possible. However, the bows and arrows that the humans relied on the most did not appear on this battlefield. The only long-range weapons that could attack the beastmen camp were the magicians hiding behind the formation, as well as a few energy weapons produced by the dwarves. Sing stood on the station wagon and looked at the dazzling fireworks that occasionally exploded in the beastmen camp. He could not help but look back at the Dwarf King with a complicated expression. However, he found that the Dwarf King was completely focused on the battlefield, not even glancing at him. "Stop pretending," Sing said indifferently. "We're on flat ground here. With your dwarf's height, you won't be able to see the battlefield. Then let me go up. This is the special chariot of the Beastmen commander. Its status is equivalent to your throne. You can't go up." "Tisk, who cares? I can see even if I don't go up." Although the Dwarf King was short and his line of sight was blocked by the beastmen in front of him, he was still a diamond rank 9 powerhouse. If he really wanted to observe the battle, he naturally had countless methods. The dwarves' weapons are really useful. To be honest, I'm a little surprised. Sing's voice was still calm, but there seemed to be a trace of heartache that could not be hidden. Now, the beastmen warriors were still charging. They had not yet reached the point of close combat, but the beastmen had already suffered heavy losses due to the dwarves' weapons. Well, I don't know when they were sold. The humans' ability to trade is really admirable. I didn't expect to see my dwarven race's products in the southern Exine Empire. The Dwarf King couldn't help but say awkwardly, indicating that it really wasn't his fault. Why aren't the beastmen using magic to fight back? They're just taking a beating? The Dwarf King looked for a while and asked curiously. Sing glanced at the Dwarf King and thought to himself, "You can really see. The beastmen are born unable to use magic," Sing said. Sing said, "Only the Eagle Clan, who are priests, can use a few types of witchcraft. Then why don't we see the humans using bows?" "Because the sand is in the hands of the priestly tribe. The humans can't shoot their arrows." As soon as Sing's voice fell, as if to prove what he said, a sandstorm that covered the sky rose without warning. It covered the entire battlefield. The sandstorm blew from the beastmen's position towards the humans' direction. The beastmen were moving with the wind, so the speed of their charge was naturally faster. And it was obvious that this was not the first time the humans had encountered such a situation. They took out a light gauze from their arms and neatly covered their eyes. This way, they would not be blinded by the sandstorm. However, things like energy cannons and magic cannons could no longer be aimed. This sandstorm provided the best cover for the beastmen. The Dwarf King looked at Sing in shock. Who would have thought that the beastmen, who had always been regarded as barbarians by other races, actually had the ability to change the weather? The priestly tribe did their best to create a sandstorm. It's really spectacular. What do you think? Sing praised proudly. At the same time, he did not forget to show off to the Dwarf King. It's indeed spectacular. The Dwarf King was a little dumbfounded. Under the cover of the sandstorm, the beastmen warriors at the front had already rushed to the front of the human shield formation. Their charge was unscrupulous and without any order. Compared to the humans who had a strict military formation, the beastmen warriors were simply a motley crew. It was as if a rising tide had hit a dam. When the beastman's charge came into contact with the shield formation, it suddenly paused. The beastman's charge was actually blocked. At this moment, the human spearmen who had been waiting for a long time stabbed out with their spears. The beastmen warriors suffered heavy casualties in an instant. But the warriors at the back did not change their expressions. They were like real waves, advancing dauntlessly. The Dwarf King was really dumbfounded. How was this a war? This was clearly a suicide mission. How could they be so stupid as to charge forward and hit the tip of a spear? The beastmen can't use magic and can't make excellent standard long-range weapons. They can only rely on their naturally strong bodies, Sing said softly when he saw the Dwarf King's incredulity. For the beastmen, this is a common thing. Chapter 155. The Dwarf King's scalp went numb as he watched from the back. He could never have imagined such a scene. If the dwarf race were to fight this battle, they would definitely have set up countless energy cannons. Everyone would have an energy gun to ensure that they wouldn't move if the enemy didn't move. If the enemy moved, they wouldn't move. They would definitely try their best to eliminate the enemy from afar. As for the human wave tactic in front of them, that would have to wait until the enemy really had the chance to charge through the dwarf race's hail of bullets. The dwarf race was a weapon forging master. They were very precious. However, what he saw now was the complete disregard for life of the orcs. Countless of their best warriors were sacrificed in vain. Even he felt sorry for them. You're really going to fight like this? The Dwarf King looked at Sing and asked, "How is this a battle? Are you wasting people because you don't have enough food to eat?" "Nonsense," Sing shouted in a deep voice. "If the dwarf race is a weapon forging master, then the orcs are all true warriors. How can we allow that to be blasphemed? Even if you're right, even if the orcs are all warriors and are ready to die, we can't fight to the death, right?" The Dwarf King said, "A warrior's destination is to die on the battlefield, but their goal is not," Sing said. "Then what is the warrior's goal?" The Dwarf King asked. "A warrior only has one goal, and that is to win." Sing said, "That's it." The Dwarf King had a look of disdain. He felt that Sing was so distressed that he became muddle-headed. He was talking in his sleep in broad daylight. You want to win by fighting like this? Humans are creatures that are good at summarizing. What do you think? Sing said, The Dwarf King was stunned by the question. He thought that Sing was really crazy. Humans have a saying, "You have a plan, I have a ladder." Although the human shield formation is solid, the orcs have fought with the humans for many years. "Naturally, we have a way to break it," Sing said. "If you have a way, hurry up and use it." The Dwarf King shouted excitedly when he heard Sing say that he had a way. He was so excited when he looked at the battlefield. It wasn't because he really cared about the life and death of the orcs. Instead, it was because in Jilin's plan, these orc warriors would be equipped with dwarven equipment and charge in enemy lines. If they all died here, then wouldn't the equipment that the dwarves made for the beastmen be wasted? More importantly, if the warrior character was gone, who would charge and break through the enemy lines? Dwarves? This was something that the Dwarf King absolutely could not accept, so he sincerely hoped that after this war, there would be more beastmen left. If I could have used it earlier, I would have used it earlier. However, no one can let a tortoise run faster than a wolf. Sing said. The Dwarf King did not understand what this meant, so he frowned and asked, "What is Zhongliangji?" "A plan devised by a man named Zhongliang." "Who is Zhongliang?" "How would I know?" "On the battlefield." Even if the beastmen warriors were attacking like raging waves, the human shield formation still stood firm. They were like reefs in the sea, using their hard bodies to look down on the storm and raging waves. As for the spearmen behind the shield formation, every time they attacked, they would cause a lot of damage to the beastmen. Just when it seemed that the beastmen were helpless, the tremors of the earth suddenly became more intense. Every one of them was 3 meters tall, with a tortoise shell on their back. The giant tortoise tribe had arrived. Then, right behind the giant tortoise tribe, the giant elephant tribe had arrived. The bear tribe had arrived. The beastmen's heavyweight warriors were like giant boulders rolling over. They had finally reached the front lines. The giant tortoise tribe was simply a natural battering ram. They had thick limbs and sturdy tortoise shells. The giant tortoise tribe warriors suddenly jumped up and nimbly turned around in the air, smashing their tortoise shells into the human shield formation. It was hard to imagine that the clumsy giant tortoise tribe could actually jump so high and turn around in the air. A giant tortoise warrior carried the momentum of Mount Tai and came crashing down unstoppably. There was a loud bang. 3 or 4 shields, as well as the humans behind them, were all sent flying. If the humans hadn't set up 3 layers of shield formation, this attack would have been enough to break a hole in the humans' sturdy defensive line. However, the other giant tortoise warriors didn't have such an easy time. While they were falling, they suddenly stopped in the air as if they were being held back by an invisible wall. Upon closer inspection, there really was a transparent wall beneath them. It was in the shape of a shield, and there was a faint carving of a world tree on it. The Church of Light's signature technique, Holy Wall. Since the giant tortoise tribe warriors were already floating in the air, they naturally became the best targets for the mages. If it wasn't for the giant tortoise tribe's shell's astonishing defensive power, this confrontation alone would have reduced the giant tortoise tribe by 60 to 70%. Your Majesty is wise. Meng Jian stood in front of the warlord and said with a sincere expression, "The Church of Light's people are really effective against this group of giant tortoises. In the past, this group of giant tortoises made us suffer a lot. This is called everything has its vanquisher. This king has long wanted to borrow the Church of Light's people to deal with this group of tortoises. It's just that all these years, Lord has always been evasive, saying that he can't make the decision because the Pope isn't around. Unfortunately, things have changed with the passage of time, and Lord is also dead," said the warlord. "This is your ladder to cross the wall?" The dwarf king was a little frantic. "Don't worry, the real war has just begun." Sing's expression was still calm, but those familiar with him could hear a trace of uncontrollable anger in his voice. Who would have thought that the people of the Saimai Empire's Church of Light would actually appear in the Nanshin Empire? The orcs and the Nanshin Empire were really familiar with each other's battles. They were familiar with each other and knew that there weren't any new tricks, but this was the first time they had fought with the Church of Light. On the battlefield, one unexpected move and one unprepared would often result in a huge loss at this time. There was a dwarf king who couldn't be hit or talked by his side, mocking him from time to time, but wouldn't be angry. When the orcs' heavyweight warriors truly joined the battle, the human camp's defensive line immediately became very difficult to maintain. Although the giant tortoise warriors were trapped in the air, the giant bear warriors were also a threat that couldn't be underestimated. Their bare paws, which were half the size of millstones, slammed into the shields with a whoosh. Every slap was extremely heavy. Every slap caused the strong humans behind the shields to sway unsteadily. The spearmen hiding behind the shields naturally couldn't stab with their spears anymore. No matter how strong the humans were, they seemed very small and weak in front of the bears. Seeing that the human shield formation was about to collapse, Meng Jian turned his head to look at the warlord. The warlord softly grunted in acknowledgement. Meng Jian abruptly lowered his head and cupped his fists towards the warlord. He put on his heavy helmet and strode towards the back. His warriors were waiting for him there. Neat and tidy heavy cavalry were lined up in square formations, wearing dark yellow heavy armor, quietly standing in the human camp. Only the war horses would occasionally snort once or twice. Other than that, there were no other sounds or movements. They were waiting with rapt attention for the moment to charge. The surrounding human warriors also subconsciously kept a distance from them, because the cavalry that was ready to charge was like an arrow that had been kept in reserve. It was breathtaking. They were the Nanshin Empire's famous Rune Cavalry. The Rune Cavalry that could clash head-on with the large orcs that were as majestic as mountains and not fall behind. Chapter 156. Meng Jian, who was fully clad in armor, walked to the front of the cavalry formation with vigor and vigor. All the cavalry instantly tensed up. Even if they did not make any obvious movements, everyone could feel that the atmosphere of the cavalry had suddenly changed. It It was like a rope that was originally slightly bent was suddenly pulled taut. There was an unridden horse in front of the cavalry formation. That was Meng Jian's mount. Meng Jian first patted the horse's neck twice, then mounted the horse and took the spear from the soldier. He turned around and glanced at the cavalry behind him from left to right. He felt that it was a little troublesome. Originally, according to the tactical arrangement of the Nanshin Empire, all the rune-heavy cavalry should be concentrated in a square formation. However, the scale of this battle was really too big and the range was too wide. As a last resort, the War King decided to divide all the rune cavalry into 10 square formations. On this battlefield of millions of people, these cavalry formations could be counted as 10 sharp arrows. Meng Jian retracted his gaze and raised the spear in his hand. Suddenly, a high-pitched horn sounded in the human camp. This was to inform the infantry in front that the cavalry was about to charge and to quickly make a path. If they were too late, they would be unlucky if they were trampled to death. Of course, being trampled to death by the cavalry was also considered dying in battle for the country. The infantrymen at the front quickly opened up 10 paths in the battle formation that originally had no gaps at all. The paths were straight, without a single bend. Their movements were clean and fast. It was as if they had practiced countless times in advance. This could not be helped, because every year there would be new recruits who did not believe in heresy being trampled into meat paste by their own cavalry. Those meat pastes that could not be gathered clearly told the infantry not to doubt the cavalry's determination to charge. Charge! Meng Jian raised the spear high, and his voice was like spring thunder. Rumble! Countless rune cavalry began to gallop. Faster and faster. Their momentum was like Mount Tai, collapsing. Their target was the large beastmen tribes. The chiefs of the giant elephant and giant bear tribes had unknowingly arrived at the battlefield and gathered the soldiers together, preparing to resist the cavalry's charge. When the cavalry charged, these orcs no longer had the time to attack the human camp's defensive line. Sing silently raised his giant sword on his shoulder and said softly, "It's about time." The Dwarf King thought to himself, "Could it be that you still have a backup plan?" He turned his head and asked, "What's almost done?" Sing got out of the carriage. After he said those words, the true powerhouses of the Beast God's mountain began to move. They began to enter the battlefield. "What I'm saying is that it's about time for the experts to join the battlefield," Sing said. "Do you want to join us?" "What opportunity?" The dwarf widened his eyes and looked at Sing as if he was looking at an idiot. "Were there any changes to the situation on the battlefield? Why can't I see it?" "Meng Jian has joined the battle. This is a signal from the humans," Sing said confidently. It was as if the humans and the beasts had a tacit understanding that didn't need to be said. The Dwarf King was tongue-tied. He was stunned for a long time before he said something. "I see." Although the beastmen and the human race had sent their own powerhouses into the battlefield, in the face of 1,000,000 people, these so-called powerhouses were nothing more than insignificant waves in the vast ocean. They couldn't cause any big waves. The rune cavalry had already fought with the large beastmen. There were casualties on both sides. The beastmen couldn't completely resist the charging momentum of the cavalry. The cavalry also couldn't break through the battle formation formed by the large beastmen. The battle situation became a stalemate. The ordinary beastmen still couldn't do anything to the shield formation of the humans. Generally speaking, the battlefield didn't seem to have changed much compared to the beginning, until an ordinary werewolf warrior rushed to the front of the shield formation. This werewolf warrior wasn't much different from the other werewolf warriors. He was equally aggressive and unafraid of death. The only difference was that this werewolf warrior was carrying a huge full-moon scimitar on his back. Of course, the spearman hiding behind the shield had already seen him, but he didn't have any thoughts. Even his eyelids didn't tremble at all, because in such a short time, he had already stabbed more than 20 werewolf warriors like this to death. It was really not surprising. It wasn't surprising that other than this spearman, the other humans who saw this werewolf only glanced at him and didn't care about him anymore. The werewolf warrior ran closer and closer. The spearman had already taken half a step forward. Holding the spear tightly, he aimed at the werewolf's throat and prepared to stab the spear. At this time, the werewolf warrior pulled out the 2-meter-long, full-moon scimitar on his back with a schwa sound. The moment the spearman saw the scimitar, he raised his eyebrows and narrowed his eyes. Because that scimitar was too good. It was the kind of good that one only needed to glance at to know it was good. The spearman felt that this scimitar was the best weapon he had ever seen in his life. Even his general's sword couldn't compare to it. In the spearman's eyes, the moment the scimitar was pulled out, it was as if a green light had been pulled out. This was because the scimitar was too smooth and the craftsmanship was extremely high. The werewolf warrior swung his scimitar at the shield. A bad premonition appeared in the spearman's heart. But soon, he smiled and felt that he was thinking too much. It must be the atmosphere of the battlefield that made him so sensitive. The reason why the spearman felt this way was because he had absolute confidence in the heavy shields made by the Nanshin Empire. The heavy shields of the Nanshin Empire were different from the other empires. The other empires made heavy shields to defend against humans, but the Nanshin Empire made heavy shields to defend against wild beasts. The heavy shields that were specially made thicker and taller were 3 fingers thick. The entire body was made of steel without a single crack. If it were to be erected, it would be 2 heads taller than an adult human. It would take at least 3 strong men to carry a heavy shield and run around. It was so sturdy that there was nothing to say. Although it was inconvenient to move, once a shield like this was erected, it meant that it didn't intend to move anymore. This was the so-called immovable mountain. It was hard to classify such a thing as a shield. This was simply a small iron wall, and on every shield there were runes that were unique to the Nanshin Empire, runes that were similar to the rune cavalry. A shield like this, a shield that could withstand the blows of the werbear without leaving a single mark, the spearman didn't believe that an ordinary werewolf could do anything. Although the thoughts in the spearman's mind were twists and turns like a small path that few people knew about in the mountains. But the movements of his hands weren't slow at all. In a split second, he seized the gap created by the werewolf slash and sent the spear in his hand out. This spear was crafty to the extreme, but the werewolf warrior didn't seem to see it, ignoring the danger of losing his life and still slashing down. It really seemed like a green arc flashed by. Crescent moon slash. The martial technique of the werewolf race. In just a moment, the crescent moon slash passed through the spear and the shield that the Nanshin Empire was so proud of, like a hot knife cutting through butter. It didn't know if it was cut, but the butter was cut into 2 pieces. The spearman was also very confused. He didn't feel anything, but his hand suddenly became lighter. It turned out that the spear in his hand had broken into 2. The shield was cut open without any obstruction. The shield warriors who had been hiding behind the shield and couldn't see the front naturally couldn't be spared. Their arms were neatly cut off. They looked at the neat cut on their arms, but they didn't have time to feel the pain. His last thought before he died was, "What a fast blade." Of course, the werewolf warrior wouldn't let go of this good opportunity. His eyes were red, and he opened his mouth wide, revealing a mouthful of sharp fangs. He waved his curved sword and rushed into the enemy's formation. Every time he waved his curved sword, he could easily set off a wave of blood in the crowd. The shield that was usually incomparably solid was like paper at this time, unable to block the slightest bit. Wherever the blade went, there was nothing that couldn't be cut in half. At this moment, the werewolf warrior was like a killing god descending to the mortal world. He went straight forward, but no one could stop him for a minute or a second. He waved his long sword like a wolf in a flock of sheep, wantonly charging and killing. No one in the enemy's formation was a match for him. When the weapons and tools that humans were proud of were insufficient, humans seemed very weak and powerless in the face of natural warriors like the Beastmen. With just 4 or 5 swings, the werewolf warrior had already passed through the 3 layers of human shield formation. Behind him, a big gap had already opened up in the shield formation, and this gap was still expanding. That was because an endless number of orcs were rushing in through the gap like a tide. The humans' defense line suddenly became precarious. Just as humans said, a dike of 1,000 miles could be destroyed by an ant's nest. Chapter 157. This is, coincidentally, Singh, who had intended to personally go into battle, saw the werewolf warrior from afar, who was like a god descending from the heavens. Seeing that the humans' defensive line had been broken so easily, Singh, who was the commander, was naturally overjoyed. He suddenly turned to look at the Dwarf King. The Dwarf King was also very surprised. He was wondering how the human defensive line, which was as solid as an iron wall, could be so easily broken by a werewolf warrior in such an unreasonable manner. It was so easy that it even felt a little ridiculous, until the Dwarf King saw the huge machete in the werewolf warrior's hand. He suddenly understood. When he and Jilin had just entered the wasteland, the first orcs they encountered were the werewolves, and this machete was the first weapon that the Dwarf King had personally forged in the orcs' territory. At that time, the Dwarf King had wanted to use this craftsmanship to open a channel of communication with the orcs, but in the end, because Jilin felt that this method was too slow, he stopped halfway. So, although it was just a casual weapon, he had put in a lot of effort. In this way, everything made sense. In the face of the extremely surprised Singh, the Dwarf King snorted arrogantly. It meant that the dwarf race was different from simple-minded orcs like you. This was just a backup plan that he had set up. Now, everything was within the king's expectations. You made that machete? Although this was a question, there was no questioning tone in Singh's words, because this was simply something that could be seen at a glance. In the entire orc wasteland, even if you turned the yellow wasteland inside out 3 times, you would not be able to find such a good machete. Even the red greatsword in Singh's hand was only better than that machete in terms of material. So, there was only one possibility. That machete was made by the Dwarf King. I didn't make it, the Dwarf King said proudly. I just repaired it a little. The Dwarf King's face was full of exultation, and he looked like a villain who was intoxicated by success and was beside himself with joy. Originally, that machete was not a commendable work for the Dwarf King. But to have the opportunity to be so arrogant in front of the former Beast King, this feeling greatly satisfied the Dwarf King's vanity. He felt that he had made the entire dwarf race proud. Then can you take a look at this and see if it can be repaired? Singh did not understand the thoughts of the Dwarf King. He only handed over the huge sword in his hand. In the face of the Beast King's accessories, the Dwarf King suddenly became serious. He pointed at the giant sword with his finger and looked at it seriously. He pondered for a moment and said, "The material is excellent. I can reforge it, but I need time." "How long?" Singh asked. 3 or 4 days, the Dwarf King said. "Then we'll talk about it later," Singh said and strode toward the front line. "I owe you one for this." Now that the human defensive line had been unexpectedly breached, the time for the decisive battle had arrived. He was also about to join the war. A legend rank expert had joined the battle. As countless orcs poured into the human battle formation, the human defensive line suddenly became unstable. This time, the defensive line was breached too early and too suddenly. There were still many arrangements that had not been used. "Your Majesty," a general next to the warlord shouted in a trembling voice. "As a general, you should remain calm even if Mount Tai collapses in front of you. What are you panicking for?" The warlord scolded. "In a battle of this level, we did not expect to be able to hold the line until the end. The orcs are not to be trifled with. Now that the defensive line has been breached, it is expected." "Your Majesty is right." The general hurriedly cupped his fist and said, "Your Majesty, what should we do now? What else can we do?" The warlord snorted. The warriors on both sides were already in a stalemate. They were fighting with their lives on the line. At this time, he could no longer give any precise orders. There were only 3 orders that could reach the ears of every soldier: advance, retreat, and fight to the death. There was no need to think about advancing. Now that the battle formation had become chaotic, there was no way to advance. As for retreating now, it was a dead end. It could easily lead to a landslide defeat. In that case, It was equivalent to not resisting and being killed by the enemy. The human camp would definitely suffer heavy casualties. Therefore, there was only one order that the warlord could give now, and that was to fight to the death. The high-pitched bugle horn that represented a battle to the death suddenly sounded. Visible to the naked eye, all the human soldiers suddenly paused. Then, the long line of defense began to break into pieces. It turned into countless small battle formations made up of more than 10 people, and even more than 20 people. In the eyes of humans, there was no such thing as a one-on-one battle in a war. At this point in the war, there was no longer any order. It was a complete mess. Singh held the red greatsword and charged left and right, killing as if there was no one around. Everywhere he went, there was a rain of blood. Even in this extremely chaotic battlefield, he was still very eye-catching. This was, of course, the strength of a legendary master was an absolute existence to others. Singh had no opponents on this battlefield. There was only a group of weak creatures for him to slaughter. Soon, even the mane on Singh's face was dyed red with blood. "Hey, you beast, don't be so presumptuous. Eat my sword," Meng Jian shouted as he rushed over from afar. The scene of Singh wantonly killing human soldiers made his blood boil and his hair stand on end. Meng Jian raised his greatsword and jumped up high, about to slash down at Singh's head with all his might. The blade was emitting a yellow glow. As Meng Jian accumulated power, it was as if countless amounts of air between heaven and earth were converging toward him. Even the surrounding air had become thinner. The full force attack of a level 9 Diamond Master was enough to change the weather. This slash contained all of his strength. No one would be careless in the face of a legend-rank powerhouse. Of course, this was not an exception. In the face of such a blow, even Singh had no choice but to be cautious. These peak diamond-level powerhouses were already half a step into the legendary realm. However, it was often the other foot that was separated by an insurmountable barrier. Singh did not do anything. He just solemnly stretched out his hand and casually scooped up something in the air. Meng Jian was actually pulled down by him. "You're not bad, but the legendary realm is not something you can understand now." Singh grabbed Meng Jian's neck and said calmly. Then, he punched Meng Jian's face without hesitation. "Also, the next time you can launch a sneak attack, don't shout." A casual punch from a legendary master was extremely heavy and had the strength to break trees and split rocks. Needless to say, Singh was a legendary master of the orc race who had a unique body. Singh casually threw the unconscious Meng Jian, whose face was covered in blood, on the ground. Then, he raised his greatsword, intending to give him another stab. He didn't have any strange feelings for human powerhouses. He only knew that if he killed a powerhouse like Meng Jian, the number of beastmen warriors who would die in the future would be much lower. Wait! All of a sudden, a thunderous voice exploded in the sky. Singh abruptly raised his head and looked over. A human figure covered in sunlight descended from the sky and rushed towards him like a meteor. Singh raised his eyebrows and held his greatsword with both hands as if he was facing a great enemy. He used all his strength to lift his greatsword. If the strength of this sword was displayed in the sea, it would be enough to set off a tsunami. The figure that descended from the sky maintained the posture of a flying kick as he charged down. His foot landed right on Singh's sword. Boom! A loud sound. A circular storm suddenly blew up with the two of them as the center without any warning, blowing away countless sand and stones, and all the humans and orcs within a few hundred meters. The two of them merely exchanged blows as a greeting, but they created a circular empty space with a diameter of 300 to 400 meters in this extremely chaotic and crowded battlefield. It achieved the effect of clearing the battlefield. As the saying goes, strength comes from the ground. The figure that descended from the sky had no way to borrow strength and quickly exhausted his strength. He bent his knee and lightly tapped on Singh's sword. With an extremely light flip, he landed steadily on the ground. His movements were so smooth and light that it was not something a human could do. "You shameless big lion. You bully the weak. You dare to bully a human junior when I'm not around." Do you have any shame? Are you still a legendary rank expert? You. After the figure landed, he began to bombard Sing with words. Sing thought to himself, on this battlefield, there is no such thing as bullying the weak. There is no such thing as face. However, he only thought these words in his heart and did not say them out loud. He only looked at the person who came and clenched his greatsword tightly. He said in a deep voice, Musin. Chapter 158. It's me, the king of fighters who had descended from the sky, had one hand on his waist, and replied heroically, Big Lion, I'm telling you, I'm not done with you for bullying the younger generation of the human race when I'm not around. I don't want to fight with you, Sing said calmly. His words were very straightforward. He had already reached the stage where he would say whatever he wanted to say. Sing and Musin were both legendary powerhouses. In fact, the two of them had dealt with each other many times in private. Sing, who was very clear about Musin's temperament, deeply understood that he could not beat around the bush when talking to this person. What implied meaning? These things didn't exist in Musin's eyes. The world in Musin's eyes was so straightforward and clear. Muexion's brain was just like his fists. They were always straightforward. Why don't you want to fight? Musin asked curiously. It seems like I'm the only one here who can fight with you. Could it be that you find it interesting to fight with those little fellows? It's better than fighting with you, Sing said. Nonsense, Musin sneered. It doesn't matter if you want to fight or not. Since we've met today, it's not up to you to decide. Hurry up and fight with me for 200 rounds. We're on the battlefield now. I'm not sparring with you. I'll go all out with my killing move once I make a move. It's impossible for us to fight for 200 rounds in such a fight. Life and death will be determined in 4 or 5 moves. Are you sure? Sing's words became slower and slower. In the end, he even paused after every word. However, every word was powerful and resonant. 200 rounds? I'm just saying it casually. Musin moved his body seriously. He bounced twice on the spot and said, However, do you really want to fight with your life on the line? Of course, Sing said expressionlessly. If you insist on stopping me, that's great. I can't ask for more. When Musin heard that Sing wanted to fight with his life on the line, his eyes instantly became sharp, and his face was filled with eagerness. The opportunity to fight with a legendary powerhouse to the death was really something that could only be encountered by chance. Of course, other than a legendary battle maniac like him, no one else would want such an opportunity. He pulled off the thin yellow cloth hood covering his body, revealing his muscular and naked upper body. The light in Sing's eyes instantly froze. An extremely shocked expression appeared on his face. He exclaimed, Where's your hand? Oh, Musin touched his shoulder that was missing an arm and said softly, Someone chopped it off. His tone was calm, as if it wasn't his hand that was cut off. Sing blinked hard, feeling a little dizzy. Can the guy Mingwe chop off your hand? Sing shouted, ignoring the pain in his throat. The reason why Sing thought that Guy Mingwe had chopped off Musin's hand was because Musin had said the word chop. No matter who it was, if they wanted to chop, they would at least have a sword, a saber, or an axe in their hands. To be able to injure Musin, one had to be at least at the legendary level. Other than himself, only the sword saint Guy Mingwe had a chance of cutting off Musin's arm. It's not the Guy Mingwe. When he heard Sing's words, Musin was anxious. He can chop off my arm? It's not the Guy Mingwe. Sing was really puzzled. Who else can it be? Who else can chop off your arm? This. Do you know that a new red megalosaurus has appeared recently? We humans call him the Red Calamity, Musin said. I see. When Sing heard Musin mention Jilin, he immediately understood. He thought to himself, I'm too familiar with this. Of course I know, Sing said. So your arm was chopped off by the megalosaurus. That's right, Musin said. That fellow is really too strong. Sing thought to himself, I know this better than you. Why don't you find out how I lost my King of Beasts position? You're known as the King of Beasts. Now that your arm has been chopped off, your strength must be greatly reduced. If you fight with me now, you won't win. You'd better leave quickly. Sing said, Hey, Big Lion, who are you looking down on? Musin instantly became anxious. Today, I'll give you a handicap with one hand. I'll still pluck off all the hair on your face." As soon as Musin finished speaking, he stomped on the ground, and a huge pit instantly appeared on the wasteland. Musin charged towards Sing like a bolt of lightning. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Sing. Arrogant. Since that's the case, don't blame me for having an unfair advantage. Sing shouted. Bring it on. Musin shouted. As he spoke, his entire body was covered in a thick yellow glow. He used his remaining right hand to smash towards Sing's face. King of Beast technique, Heavenfall Punch. The wind from Musin's punch was extremely strong, and it blew all the hair on Sing's face back. His punch was very straight and fast. It could even be said that there was no one in the entire continent whose punch was faster than Musin's. However, in that split second, Sing actually had time to raise the red sword in front of his face. When such a huge sword was raised in front of him, it was like a shield. Another boom was heard. It was a deafening loud sound. This loud sound temporarily suppressed the sounds of fighting on the battlefield. On the ground behind Sing, a deep trench about 100 meters long had appeared. Sing could not help but retreat from this punch. In the end, he stabbed his sword into the ground to stabilize himself. What's wrong? Didn't you say that you were going to fight with your life on the line? Musin shouted arrogantly after forcing Sing to retreat with a punch. As expected of you. Sing stood up and patted the dust off his armor. He said calmly, although you've lost an arm, you can still throw out such a beautiful punch. Your strength hasn't decreased by much. It's really rare. Of course, Musin said. However, it hasn't decreased by much. In the end, it still decreased. So, the current you can't defeat me. Sing's words left no room for doubt. That's not necessarily true, Musin said. Then, he got into a very strange fist position. I'll let you have a taste of my newly developed, single-handed fist technique. Come on, Sing suddenly shouted. This time, he was the one who rushed forward. The huge red sword in Sing's hand wantonly waved as if it was easy. Every time he waved it, there would be a strong gust of sword wind. Whooshing sounds. These strong gusts of wind were filled with sword energy and were as sharp as swords. Soon, Sing's body was surrounded by these sword-like winds. There was no gap at all. Howling wind swordsmanship. Now, everyone who wanted to get close to Sing had to pass through these sword-like winds that could cut people in half. However, Musin treated Sing's sword-like winds as if they were nothing. He raised his fist and rushed in. Instantly, sword-like winds and fist-like winds rose. They swept in all directions. The surrounding ground began to crack. Sword and fist, no one dared to get close. Chapter 159. It's just a fight. What's so exciting about it? Aisha disagreed with Jilin's words. It's Sing and the guy whose hand I chopped off, Jilin said. Aisha furrowed her brows and thought for a moment. She rolled her eyes and understood who Jilin was talking about. After she understood, she sneered and said disdainfully, the battle between the most brainless human legend and a wild beast is even more boring. What's there to watch? Do you think there's anything interesting about the two of them? Aisha felt that she could even imagine the scene of the fight between the two of them. She reckoned that they would hit each other once, and neither of them would dodge. It would be a fight to see who would be the first to give up and fight to the extreme. There's no flower, Jilin said seriously. But there's a river? The moment Jilin finished speaking, the sound of surging water could be heard. It rumbled as if 10,000 horses were galloping. On the empty ground where Sing and Sing were fighting, a surging river appeared without any warning. There was no beginning or end, and only the middle part of the river was surging endlessly. It was just a strange phenomenon, something like a mirage, but it felt incomparably real. A river suddenly appeared on the empty ground. This was, of course, an extremely shocking thing. Many human soldiers and orcs stopped what they were doing, but they still maintained their alert postures. Their eyes were focused on this rare, strange phenomenon. This long river was very wide. Even Aisha could see it with her naked eyes. It almost covered the entire empty ground. Aisha looked at the surging river and said in surprise, "There's actually flowers. Where are the flowers?" Jilin asked. Aisha immediately rolled her eyes at Jilin and said to herself, "This is a strange phenomenon. It's a legendary realm. It's a manifestation of a great cultivator using his own strength to activate the power of the heavens and the earth. Before this, only the guy Mingyue, the sword saint of the Middle Empire, could reach this realm. Sing shouldn't have been able to do it before. I didn't expect that after losing an arm, his realm would increase greatly. It's really a blessing in disguise." Jilin was silent for a moment before asking softly, "Who's Sing? Stai didn't even teach you this." Aisha said. Jilin shrugged. Aisha sighed deeply and held her forehead. She said helplessly, "This is a story, and it's a very long story." This was the meaning of long story. When someone said long, it's usually meant that they didn't want to talk about it. Those who knew a little about the ways of the world would stop there and not pursue the matter further. However, this was a tacit understanding between humans. How could Jilin have it? Jilin looked at the endless river and said to Aisha, "It's also a very long story." He meant that the time the two people fought was enough for her to finish telling the story. Aisha clicked her tongue and sighed as if she had accepted her fate. She sorted out the plot in her mind and tried to tell the story as concise as possible. Once upon a time, there was a man called Sing. He had a horse and a son. Later, the horse went missing, but he wasn't sad. Then the horse came back with a pony, but he wasn't happy either. Later, his son rode the pony and became crippled, but he still wasn't sad. In the end, his son avoided the country's conscription because he was crippled. Aisha finished telling Sing's story in a few sentences. It was indeed very concise, and the main points were clear. But there was no story to speak of, leaving Jilin at a loss as to what to say. "Are you sure this is really his son?" Jilin frowned and thought for a long time before saying this. "It should be," Aisha said. "Then this human called Sing seems to be sick in the head." Jilin said. "What do you mean?" Aisha casually gave Jilin a topic. At the same time, she found it funny. The phrase "sick in the head" was often used by the third prince when he came to play with them. She didn't expect Jilin to learn it. He's not happy when something good happens, but he's not sad when something bad happens. Doesn't that mean he'll never be happy or sad? He'll be like a block of wood. Then what's the point of living? Jilin said. Aisha was silent and wisely didn't continue the topic. She thought to herself, "It's not even certain if there's really a Sing, so why should I be so serious with you?" Just as Jilin was about to continue, a lion's roar suddenly resounded through the world. It instantly covered the sound of the surging water. Jilin saw a huge lion appear in the middle of the river. This lion was so huge that it made the originally wide river look like a small stream with a rapid current under its body. The huge lion flopped left and right in the river, beating the waves. It kept roaring and roaring. It was awe-inspiring. "You said before that there are very few people who can reach this realm?" Jilin looked at Aisha. "Yes." Aisha nodded and said, "Have you ever told the truth?" Jilin asked very sincerely. "Witches never tell lies." Aisha said solemnly, "We just don't tell the whole truth." "Then this is?" Jilin pointed at the lion. "I didn't expect." Aisha murmured, "Could it be that after he was abused by you, his realm also increased? This thing seems a little interesting." Jilin looked at the river and lion and clicked his tongue. "You can't do it?" Aisha asked. "I've never tried." Jilin shook his head gently. "I've never had such a close connection with this world like them. This isn't my world." "That's true." Slowly, the river gradually calmed down. Everyone knew what this meant. The Emperor of Physique, Musin, was about to be unable to hold on. However, just as the human soldiers were watching nervously and all the orc warriors were about to cheer, the river suddenly disappeared. In its place was a one-armed war god in golden armor. He suddenly stood in the air. The posture of the war god in golden armor was incomparably majestic and sacred. The golden armor shone brightly as if it could glow. The war god roared, and it seemed that the sky was shaking. He waved his one arm and rushed forward, fighting with the lion. The lion was not afraid at all and pounced towards the war god. He can actually trigger two phenomena. Aisha could not help but exclaim. Musin is really a genius. It was rare for Aisha to praise someone so directly, not to mention a simple-minded brute like Musin who was all brawn and no brains. However, if even Aisha was praising him, it meant that what Mu Xian had done was truly unprecedented. The one-armed one is about to lose. Jilin suddenly said, It's useless to do all these. Once the momentum is broken, how can it be so easy to recover? Oh, Aisha heard this and looked towards the empty space. Indeed, after 4 or 5 rounds of fighting with the giant lion, the one-armed warrior gradually could not hold on and revealed an opening. The giant lion's sharp claws ruthlessly scratched his chest. The war god's body shook violently and turned into light spots that filled the sky and slowly dissipated. It was like the autumn wind blowing away dust. After the war god completely dissipated, the giant lion also let out a long roar. Then, its body gradually became transparent until it completely disappeared. All the phenomena on the empty space in the battlefield completely disappeared, and the empty space returned to its original state. Everyone could finally see the scene in the empty space clearly again. The physical emperor, Musin, was tragically half-kneeling on the ground. His body was covered in wounds of various sizes. Blood was flowing everywhere. Although Sing was standing, he was also leaning on his sword. There was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. The armor on his arm was completely shattered, and there was an extremely eye-catching fist mark on his chest. I didn't expect you to improve to such a level. Sing panted heavily and said with a hoarse voice, It's the same for you. Mu Xian revealed his white teeth and smiled brightly. However, the injuries all over his body made his smile look a little miserable. The soaring river fist at the beginning was really like the Yangtze River. It was continuous and surging, Sing praised. Your howling wind swordsmanship is also very powerful. It's much more ferocious than before, Musin said. Sing touched the painful fist mark on his chest and asked seriously, What fist was it after that? It was Musin's sudden change in the strange fist technique that caused him the most serious injury. I created a fist technique when I passed by a temple. Musin's face was full of pride. The one-armed divine fist. Even in such a scene and such an atmosphere, Sing could not help but feel a little astonished. This name, it's indeed powerful, Sing said. However, you still lost. Do you regret it? Musin shook his head and laughed. It's quite regretful, but I don't regret it. To be able to go through such a battle, my life is not in vain. I think you don't have to regret it, Sing said. Sing said, You have one less hand than me. It's normal that you can't beat 2 hands with 1 hand. This was not just normal. It was a matter of course. Musin was stunned. Then he smiled casually. That might not be the case. You lost. Sing raised his sword and repeated himself. I know. Musin nodded and said seriously, Please make your move, shamelessly asking for a recommendation vote. Thank you, everyone. Chapter 160. Of course, Sing said in a deep voice. Musin was knocked to the ground by Sing, and he said calmly, Please do it. His tone was calm, as if Musin did not know that his words meant that he was handing over his life. It was more like he was eating at the same table with Sing, but Sing did not put down his chopsticks even though the table was full of delicious dishes. Mu Xian was friendly and friendly. He even said politely, Come, please make your move. Sing was not pretentious. He answered, Of course, and walked forward with his huge sword. He did not have the special feelings of a human hero. To Sing of the orc race, killing a human legendary powerhouse was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It was the same even for a legendary powerhouse who had lost an arm. He would not give up such an opportunity easily. If the human race lost Musin, the number of orc warriors who would die would decrease tremendously. No matter from which angle, Sing was not allowed to be merciful. Sing dragged his heavy but firm steps and walked to Musin's side. He raised the huge red sword in his hand. He said in a deep voice, You are not the first legendary powerhouse to die under this sword. You should know the name of this sword. It is the sword of glory of the orcs, Blood Fawn. Why are you still talking so much nonsense at this time? Musin raised his head reluctantly and glared at Sing. Do I have to cooperate with you and say that it is an honor to die under this sword? Sing was silent for a long time. After a while, he said, You are right. But aren't you afraid of death? Musin looked at Sing as if he was looking at an idiot and said, Everyone is afraid of death, but everyone has to die. It is useless to be afraid. It is useless to be afraid. So you're not afraid? That doesn't make sense. Don't think about it. That is escaping, but there is no other way. That makes sense. Nonsense. Rest in peace. After Sing finished speaking, the huge sword in his hand fell. The sound of the huge sword cutting through the air was heard, and it made people's hair stand on end. This proved that Sing did not hesitate at all in this attack. It was an all-out attack. The surrounding human and orc warriors had already switched from spectator mode to fierce battle mode. This was because the human warriors wanted to rush forward to save Musin, but the beastmen warriors didn't let them. As a result, the chaotic battlefield was filled with the sounds of killing once again. Coincidentally, the empty space beside Sing was still empty. It's rare to find a special human, but he's going to die so easily. Jilin shook his head and said, I thought this kind of person should have died in my hands. I didn't expect that he would be killed by someone else. You feel sorry for her? Aisha asked. Yes, a little bit. Jilin said honestly. In normal human stories, a human like him should be a hero who can change the course of a war, but he hasn't reached the level of a hero who can save the world. Although it's a pity, it's still a supporting role. What about you? Aisha asked with great interest. What role do you play in the human story? Do you even need to ask? Jilin said. Of course, the biggest villain. What about me? Aisha pointed at herself. Little villain, Jilin said. But if it's a story about a princess, you're the big villain. Because I don't have a chance to appear. Aren't princesses usually captured by dragons like you? Just like the one lying in the carriage. Aisha pouted at the carriage. There are also many who are cursed by witches, Jilin said. So, the princess seems to be the most dangerous human character? Aisha said. No. Jilin looked at the vast battlefield and the countless warriors who were fighting for their lives. He said, the most dangerous human character is the side characters. They're the guards who protect the ancestors and the dragons. They're the knights who follow the king to fight against the witches. In the story, they have no names, no past, and even no emotions. It's as if their existence is for that moment of meaningless death. They're characters who are born to set off how powerful villains like you and me are. They are characters who are born to die. You know quite a lot, Aisha said as she looked at Jilin. I know a lot of human stories. Jilin said calmly. A tragic scene like this where heroes sacrifice themselves will always be the climax of the story. Just as Jilin was speaking, Sing had already raised the broken sword in his hand. Why do you seem to be looking forward to it? Aisha asked. It's just that, of course, a tragic story makes people feel pity, but it's also fascinating, Jilin said. It makes people love and hate it. That's the wonderful part of the story. You're not human, Aisha said. Although she said it lightly, it was as if there was a sudden snowstorm in her heart. She felt a little cold for no reason. She suddenly understood that when Jilin looked at the battlefield, he put himself in the perspective of a bystander who was detached from the world. In Jilin's eyes, this war was nothing more than a vivid story. For some reason, Aisha suddenly said, he won't die. Who are you talking about? Jilin asked. Of course it's Musin, Aisha said. I don't think so. When Jilin said this, Sing and Musin had finished talking. Sing had just finished saying, go well. He can, Aisha said with absolute certainty. Why? Jilin asked. Because he's a legendary expert of the Nanshin Empire, a legendary expert of the human race. His opponent is the orcs, Aisha said. It just so happens that the strongest human of the human race, is here. He won't just watch as a legendary expert of the same race is killed. The strongest human. Jilin raised his eyebrows and said, Who is it? Look, a bronze spear flew at high speed from afar. The intense friction with the air caused the spear god to buzz. The sharp sound pierced everyone's ears. The spear that suddenly appeared seemed to have pierced through time and space. Before Sing's huge sword landed, it fiercely stabbed into the ground in front of Muzin. Clang! Sing's huge sword slashed at the spear. The intense vibrations from the spear were transmitted to Sing's arm through the huge red sword. Sing couldn't help but take 2 steps back. He actually felt that his arm was a little numb. Sing looked at the spear in shock. Just the aftershock of the thrown weapon was enough to make his arm numb. What was the frequency of the vibrations from the weapon? Or rather, how much strength did the person who threw the spear have? Who is it? Sing shouted. Tisk! Muzin turned his eyes and glanced at the spear. In the sky, a huge, almost corporeal shadow of a deity wearing yellow armor and holding a shield and a spear quietly appeared. This figure was actually twice as big as the one-armed god of war that Muzin had summoned earlier. The War King slowly walked out of the crowd. At this moment, his aura was as heavy as a mountain. Even the orc warriors beside him didn't have the slightest intention of attacking him. Just like that, the War King appeared in front of Sing like an emperor on an inspection tour. King of the Nanshin Empire. War King, War Song. The War King wore the same armor as the god in the sky. It was the set of ancestral armor that he had carefully wiped countless times. Holding the same shield, countless rays of light enveloped him, making him look like a god that had descended to the mortal world. It was as if the god in the sky was himself. This doesn't seem to be the anomaly just now, Jilin said. This seems to be, that's right, Aisha said. It's a god's descent. Again, Jilin was shocked. Where did so many boring gods come from? This is different from Staya and Gai Mingwe. Aisha said, this is a descendant of God who can use God's power at will without paying a price. He is the strongest human. The War King is the king of battles. Isn't this unreasonable? Jilin said. Aisha's expression instantly became extremely complicated. She thought to herself, you're actually reasonable? Begging for a wave of recommendation votes. Asterisk. Chapter 161. To ordinary people, the war monarch is indeed unreasonably powerful. A person who can use the power of the gods as he wishes is indeed extremely terrifying. Because of this alone, the war monarch status is higher than all the other legendary experts in the world, Aisha said. Then what kind of god is this? Jilin looked at the huge figure in the sky. It's the war god, Aisha said. The war god. Jilin's tone was filled with disbelief. Then how can a human use the power of the war god as he wishes? As I said before, the war monarch is the descendant of the war god. Isn't it natural for the old ancestor to take care of his own descendant? Aisha said, do you think I can believe that? Do you think I'm stupid? Jilin looked at Aisha strangely. Indeed, the human royal family always likes to boast that they have some inextricable relationship with the gods. This is to achieve the combination of royal authority and divine authority, so that they can better rule the empire. For example, the emperor of the Middle Empire will say that he is the son of heaven. When the emperor of the Saimai Empire ascends the throne, the pope will definitely be by his side to express the meaning of divine authority. The Divine Dragon Empire's royal family even directly boasted that every one of their descendants has half-dragon bloodline. Jilin exclaimed when he heard the last sentence. He thought to himself, why didn't I notice this before? These are all fake. The royal family made them up to deceive the people. Aisha waved her lily-white hand in a straightforward manner. Oh, Jilin seemed to sigh in relief. But the one in the Nanshin Empire is real. Aisha suddenly changed the topic and said, he really is the descendant of the war god. Jilin's interest was piqued. Countless years ago, this world had a mythological era. I'm sure you know about it. Aisha said softly. The mythological era ended because humans were no longer willing to accept the marionettes of the gods. However, the fuse that started the war that ended the mythological era was the war god. It was the war god who led humans to wage war against the gods. It was also because of the war god's protection that humans had the courage to resist the gods. Why would the war god help humans and make life difficult for his own kind? Jilin asked with a frown. Hee hee. Aisha shook her head and laughed. Her laughter was full of contempt. Just like a saint of the Central Empire wrote, "Ask the world, what is love? It's a life and death commitment." What do you mean? Jilin couldn't believe his own conjecture. You see, you can't believe it. Aisha laughed. It means that the god of war has fallen in love with a human woman. Who knows? Maybe the war god is special. Aisha said irresponsibly. All right then. Even if the war god fell in love with a woman, what does that have to do with war? Jilin reluctantly accepted. Hee hee. Aisha laughed contemptuously again. When you found out that the Divine Dragon Empire's royal family had the dragon bloodline, why did you suddenly become nervous? And when you found out that the news was fake, you heaved a sigh of relief. Jilin remained silent because he had nothing to say. Because you know the humans have the dragon bloodline. That means that there is a union between a dragon and a human. Aisha looked straight at Jilin. You are nervous because you look down on humans from the bottom of your heart. You feel that the dragon race is high and mighty. You feel that the dragon race has embarrassed you and tarnished the reputation of the dragon race. You feel ashamed and even disgraced. Jilin looked at Aisha without saying anything. This was a tacit agreement. If the dragon race thinks this way, then the gods think even more so. The gods felt that it was extremely absurd. They felt that the war god had accidentally been corrupted and fallen. They wanted to save the war god. They said that they would let the war god kill that woman and then return to the heavenly realm. If the war god was unwilling, then the gods would help him, Aisha said. And then they fought? Jilin continued. Yes. Aisha nodded. In the end, the war god died under the joint attack of the gods. Although he was brave and unparalleled, the other gods were equally strong. In particular, some of them used underhanded methods. You even know this, Jilin said. Of course. Aisha smiled faintly and took out the darkness scripture. She flipped to a certain page. There are detailed records here because the one who used underhanded methods to assassinate the war god was the god of darkness. You can record such a despicable method yourself. Jilin didn't believe it. He took the darkness scripture and started reading. Originally, apart from Aisha herself, no one else could see the contents of the darkness scripture. If one forcefully flipped through it, they would only see a ball of darkness. However, these things naturally couldn't block the golden eyes of the dragon race that have been passed down for generations. He seems to be very proud of this, Aisha said. This he was referring to the god of darkness. That's true. Jilin was speechless. Then this person is really the descendant of a god? How is it? Amazing, right? Aisha said. Although only the successor of the throne can use the power of a god in each generation. Even so, it's enough to allow the war god race to stand at the top of the world for generations. No. Jilin's expression was somewhat ugly. I don't think it's that amazing. I think it's a little disgusting. When the war god walked out of the crowd, Singh felt that this person was extraordinary. A pressure that could topple mountains and overturn seas rushed towards him, making it hard for him to breathe. In order to prevent any accidents from happening, Singh took advantage of the time when the war god introduced himself to raise his giant sword, bypass the battle spear, and stab towards Musin. The previously unparalleled giant sword was now as nimble as a snake. The opportunity to kill a legendary powerhouse was too rare. He didn't want to give it up. Dang! A sound was heard. A shield suddenly appeared in front of Musin without any warning, blocking the huge sword. Behind the shield, the war god's yellow helmet and majestic eyes were revealed. The royal aura was like a prison. Ow! Singh was shocked. Just a second ago, the war god was clearly standing 100 steps away from him. How could he appear here in an instant? Judging from the war god's appearance, it was impossible for him to be a sorcerer. It was impossible for him to possess a godly skill like teleportation. Although Singh was shocked, he was still a legendary powerhouse. He was only stunned for a short moment before he gathered all his strength on the tip of his sword. Sing's full-strength sword, coupled with the innate strength of the orcs and this giant red sword, was enough to split mountains and split the earth. However, this earth-shattering power didn't cause any commotion. The moment he came into contact with the shield, Sing only felt that his power was like a clay ox entering the sea. It strangely disappeared just like that. Sing was shocked. He secretly cursed. Oh no. He was about to withdraw his sword and be on guard. However, it was already too late. The war god took advantage of the moment when Sing was about to withdraw his sword. He fiercely raised the shield in his hand. The shield seemed to bring about a gust of wind. It whistled as it crashed towards Sing. Sing didn't have time to react at all. He only had time to cross his arms in front of his body. Clang! A loud sound resounded through the battlefield. Sing had never felt such a heavy impact before. It was as if all the warriors of the Tauren tribe had crashed towards him at the same time, and they had crashed into the same spot at the same time. A loud sound suddenly rang out somewhere, and people couldn't help but look in that direction. Then, people saw the lion-headed orc, who was more than 2 meters tall and looked as mighty as a god, fly out. Finally, with a plop, he fell to the ground. There was no sign of him preparing to land. Everyone was silent. The person who was invincible just a moment ago was beaten to the point where he couldn't fight back at all and was sent flying. This scene changed too suddenly and abruptly. People needed some time to digest and accept it. However, silence was always broken by people, and the people who broke the silence were usually reckless people. "Why did you come out?" Musin asked. As the ruler of a country, it's not your turn to personally charge and break through the enemy lines. Even if a legendary powerhouse were to say that to an emperor, it would be a little too impolite. Of course, Sword Saint and the Emperor of the Middle Empire didn't count. They were family. However, the war god obviously wasn't angry. He even smiled and said, "Brother Musin, how can I watch you die here? The Nanshin Empire can't do without you now." Nonsense. Musin obviously didn't buy it. How long have I been in the Nanshin Empire? If they really can't do without me, the empire would have been destroyed long ago. These words weren't just rude, they were simply disgraceful. However, the war god wasn't angry. He calmly helped Musin up. As a legendary master, as long as he doesn't die, even his name is useful. Cough, cough. An extremely painful cough sounded. Sing struggled to get up from the ground. The mane on his chest and chin were all stained with glowing red blood. Sing coughed twice and spat out a mouthful of blood on the ground. He looked at the war god. What a powerful shield. What a person who can endure. With such strength, we orcs actually thought that the war god's realm wasn't high. What a joke, Sing said. Cut the crap. The war god raised his battle spear and said in a deep voice, full of killing intent, "Beast King Sing, you will die under this battle spear today. Prepare to die." Other than Musin, the war god was never polite when talking to others. "I'm a former Beast King. Furthermore, I might not die." Sing wiped the blood off his mane. There wasn't a trace of fear on his face. His eyes were filled with battle intent. An injured beast was always more dangerous. Please recommend me. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Chapter 162. Sing let out a deafening lion's roar, raised his giant sword, and charged forward. His momentum was indomitable, not at all like a person who had just been sent flying by someone. While Sing was charging forward, a red light suddenly appeared all over his body. His eyes also became blood red, and there was even a trace of uncontrollable madness in his eyes. The innate skill of the orcs, Berserk. Orcs who use Berserk would have all kinds of physical abilities greatly increased. However, endless killing intent would appear out of nowhere in their minds, eroding their minds. Orcs needed to use a firm will to ensure that their minds were clear. If they were not careful, they would completely become a real beast that only knew how to kill. But the problem was that orcs did not have a firm will in the face of the killing intent in their hearts. This was the nature of the orcs. Therefore, very few orcs used this skill. But Singh was a legendary powerhouse, so he naturally had the confidence to remain clear-headed in the face of endless killing intent. The red giant sword was swung vigorously, and the sharp sound of the air being torn apart made no one doubt the power of the giant sword. It had definitely reached the legendary stage where one would be injured by a graze and die by a touch. Suddenly, a flame ignited on the giant's sword that was constantly swinging. Then, with a boom, it burned fiercely. The giant sword became a huge fireball, and it was extremely dazzling as it was swung. Its momentum was astonishing. The Battle King stared at the giant sword that had suddenly ignited. He could feel the immense pressure and terrifyingly high temperature emanating from it. He loudly praised, "Good. This is the first time I've seen an orc use a combat skill in Berserk state, and such a high-level combat skill, as expected of the Orc King." "I already said that he's the former Orc King," Singh said reluctantly. "Warlord, take my strongest sword, mountain-splitting flaming sea sword." The giant sword was wrapped in an even bigger flame and smashed toward the warlord. The wind pressure created blew away countless gravel around the warlord's feet. This was Singh's full-strength sword, and its momentum and timing had reached the peak. The giant sword smashed onto the warlord's shield. Everyone felt as if there was a sudden clap of thunder in the sky. There was also a sudden gust of wind, with Warlord Singh as the center, blowing in all directions. It swept across wantonly. The human warriors who were slightly shorter couldn't even keep their feet steady. In the eyes of all the humans, the Battle King had clearly sunk. The War King's feet sank into the ground up to his ankles. 4 or 5 long cracks began to extend from the Battle King's feet, stretching as far as the eye could see. Even the shield in Warlord's hand was unable to completely block Singh's full-powered strike. However, that was all. The Warlord raised his head and looked at Singh, who was half a body taller than him. He said in a deep voice, "You're very strong, but I'm the strongest." The Battle King parted Singh's giant sword and casually summoned a spear. It was an unstoppable strike. It was as if even if there was a huge rock in front of him, it would be directly flattened by this sweep. Singh had already used all of his strength, relying solely on his instincts to raise his giant sword, intending to block the attack. "Dang!" a sound was heard. The huge sword was sent flying, and it spun in the air countless times. Singh was also swept to the ground without any suspense. He was already at the end of his rope. Singh immediately struggled to get up, but he suddenly felt a sharp pain coming from his shoulder. The Battle King's spear pierced through Singh's shoulder from behind, nailing him to the ground. Singh's head was covered in cold sweat, but he gritted his teeth and did not cry out. "Beast King Singh, why did you start such an unwise war? In my opinion, neither you nor I have a definite chance of winning this war. You have no reason." The Battle King looked down at Singh from above. "You won with an unfair advantage." Singh did not reply. "This is not your own strength. How can there be fairness on a battlefield? Your words are a little degrading to the Beast King," the Battle King said expressionlessly. "That's true." Singh smiled self-deprecatingly. "What kind of strength is this? How can it defeat a legend so easily?" "The strength of a god," the Battle King said. Then he looked at his left hand, which was still trembling, and said again, "And it wasn't easy. So it didn't lose unjustly?" Singh asked. "Of course." The Battle King drew his spear and pointed it at Singh's head. "Because I'm the strongest." Arrogant. Singh shook his head and said, "This is the truth," the Battle King said seriously. The Battle King said seriously, "When I wear this armor, I will be the Battle King, the King of Battle, invincible under the heavens." Singh glanced at the Battle King and did not say anything. The Battle King thought that Singh had nothing else to say, so he gripped his spear tightly and stabbed it down with all his might. In his eyes, Singh was a qualified warrior. He did not want his warrior to suffer any more humiliation and pain. He wanted to kill Singh cleanly and not let him feel any unnecessary pain. This was the Battle King's respect for his warriors. The spear seemed to come alive the moment it was gripped tightly. It became like a green snake and charged towards Singh ferociously. There was a whistling sound as it pierced through the air. However, just as everyone thought that Sing was about to die and that the orcs were about to lose a legendary powerhouse, a figure that was covered in flames suddenly appeared in front of Sing like a ghost. He did not seem to use much strength. It was as if he had just reached out casually and grabbed the spear's shaft tightly. The spear was like a snake that had been grabbed by its weak point. No matter how it struggled, it could not move at all. The Battle King's stab was extremely fast. Even if it was done in a flash, it would not be an exaggeration to say that it was as fast as lightning. Trying to catch such a fast object was already a fleeting matter, not to mention that the battle spear was imbued with an incomparably tyrannical force. It was even more difficult than an ordinary person trying to grab an arrow that had just left the bow with their bare hands. However, this person covered in flames had grabbed the spear so easily. That casual look of his made it seem as if he had just done a trivial daily thing that was not worth mentioning. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you kill this guy yet. I still have a use for him," that person said calmly. His battle spear was suddenly grabbed and stopped. This was something the Battle King had never experienced before. Hence, the Battle King raised his head in shock. What appeared before his eyes was an ordinary and slightly delicate face of a youth. However, this ordinary face, coupled with the raging flames on his back and shoulders, actually made him look terrifying and strange. He looked like one of those legendary high-level demons from hell that looked very much like a human. The Battle King glanced at the burning flames behind that person, then tested the strength of his spear. He had a rough guess. "You are the Red Disaster," the Battle King slowly said. His body was extremely tense, as if he was facing a great enemy. "Humans do like to call me that," Jilin said with a smile, making this youth's face look even more radiant and bashful. "But I don't think I did anything." "Disaster? You humans just like to make a big fuss out of nothing." "Did nothing." The Battle King stared at Jilin, unable to deny it. "Why are you here? Why should I tell you?" Jilin looked at the Battle King strangely. "You should have been exiled to another world by the Sword Saint." The Battle King looked at Jilin, speaking faster and faster. "I don't really like the word exile." Jilin frowned slightly and pushed the spear away. The Battle King only felt a huge force surge from the spear like seawater. He could not help but take 3 steps back. Jilin glanced at the Battle King's spear. "This thing of yours is a little strange. You don't seem to be as strong as the rumors say." The Battle King looked at Jilin, seemingly eager to give it a try. If Muzin's description of the Red Disaster was true, then even if it was just a casual attack, he should not have just taken 3 steps back. "Is that so?" Jilin raised his head and raised his right hand. A flame suddenly erupted from his palm. It was like a real ray of light, instantly hitting the Battle King. With a loud bang, the flames soared into the sky. The ground shook twice, and then smoke and dust filled the sky. "Please recommend me, collect me. Please bear with it. Thank you." Chapter 163. Jilin merely casually struck out, but the momentum it created was enough to make people feel horrified. All the humans stared nervously at the cloud of dust that they couldn't see through. Even Mu Xian suddenly stood up and looked in that direction with his eyes wide open. "Your Majesty," Muzin called out in a trembling voice. Although the warlord was known as the strongest human, and Muzin was well aware of his abilities, Jilin's terror was still deeply imprinted in Muzin's mind, in Muzin's heart. Although the warlord was strong, he couldn't compare to Jilin. Of course, how could a human compare to a megalosaurus? The cloud of dust slowly dissipated, and the warlord's strong figure appeared before everyone's eyes. At that moment, the warlord, who was originally well-proportioned, looked extremely tall. "Looks like something really happened to you." The warlord put down his shield. "Looks like the Golden King didn't lie to us. The one here should only be a clone." Jilin raised his head slightly and looked down at the warlord. He didn't say anything. Just now, Sing kept saying that he was the previous Beast King. "So, the next Beast King must be you?" asked the warlord. Jilin didn't move at all, as if he was petrified. He still didn't say anything. Sing, who was sitting on the ground, glanced at the warlord when he heard that. He thought to himself, Did you hear what I said just now? So, you were the one who started this war? The warlord pointed his spear at Jilin. Why did you start such a huge war? The Red Calamity really lives up to its name. You are the calamity of the human race. Jilin continued to stare at the Battle King. However, the corners of his mouth curled into a cruel smile. It was a horrifying sight to behold. Only a few of the humans who faced Scarlet Unicorn swords were left half dead. However, Jilin also wanted to ask the warlord's question. Hence, Jilin turned to look at Sing and asked calmly, why did they start fighting? This is a long story, Sing lowered his eyes and said softly, indicating that it was not convenient to talk about it now. He couldn't possibly tell Jilin in front of so many humans, especially the Battle King, that it was all because of him. It's all because you revealed your true form outside the Beastmen Mountain that people saw you. Then, all of the Beastmen went crazy. They didn't care about anything else and came here to fight with the humans. Didn't we agree before? Wait until everything is ready to fight? It's not the right time yet. Why are you in such a hurry? Jilin's tone had a hint of complaint. Who do you think it was because of? Sing said in his mind. See, I didn't let you hit me, but you just had to hit me. Great, now you're hurting yourself. So many Beastmen warriors died like that. What a pity. The more Jilin spoke, the more spirited he became. There was a faint sign of him not being able to stop. If these soldiers had the same weapons as humans, wouldn't they be able to fight against 10 people by themselves? Sing looked at Jilin with a hint of resentment in his eyes. You're talking as if I'm the one who led this battle. Just as Jilin was speaking, a short and small figure suddenly rolled over like a ball and rushed over at a jaw-dropping speed. He left a long trail of smoke behind him. Although the figure was short, his speed was extremely fast. It didn't take long for him to pass through the crowd and rush into the open space where the weakest was at the legendary level. It was the Dwarf King. The Dwarf King was sprinting at the diamond level. Of course, his speed was frighteningly fast. The Dwarf King rushed to Jilin's side like an earth dragon. He was panting and sweating profusely. For a diamond-level expert, this reaction was enough to prove that he had used all his strength in his previous sprint. The Dwarf King rushed to Jilin in such a hurry. He didn't care about the etiquette of a king at all. Of course, it wasn't because he missed an old friend that he hadn't seen for a long time. The Dwarf King took 2 deep breaths and forcibly suppressed his surging breath. He stared at Jilin with his eyes wide open. His eyes were full of the light called anticipation. He asked in a trembling voice, "Have you gotten the god's spirit?" His voice was trembling not because he was tired, but because he was excited. After the Dwarf King said this, he suddenly felt his eyes become hot. The tip of his nose even felt a little sour. The dignified king of the dwarf race, after saying this sentence, he almost shed tears. No wonder the Dwarf King couldn't control himself. This was the 1,000-year wish of the dwarf race. How could the Dwarf King be excited when the hope of forging a divine weapon was right in front of him? Ever since Jilin went to the Middle Empire, the Dwarf King hadn't had a good night's sleep. Even Jilin felt that the Dwarf King's enthusiasm at this time was a little hot. He couldn't help but take a step back and look away. He scratched his face with his index finger and said hesitantly, "This half and half." The Dwarf King suddenly roared. "What do you mean half? What do you mean half?" Sing tilted his head back and thought that the Dwarf King's voice was no worse than his Lion Man's voice. It's a long story. It's a long story. Jilin pressed the Dwarf King down with both hands. He suddenly understood the true meaning of the so-called long story. However, the Dwarf King couldn't care less about Jilin's first use of indirect meaning. "What do you mean half? Tell me now." The Dwarf King was really anxious. "Did you get it or not?" "Your Excellency is the Dwarf King?" The warlord, who had been watching for a long time, finally spoke. His tone was extremely polite, which was rare for him. The warriors on both sides had already stopped fighting and returned to their camps with great tacit understanding. The battlefield was once again divided into 2 distinct sides. Peace was restored. This was because the new Orc King had arrived and was already on the battlefield. This meant that the commander of the Orcs had changed. If they were to fight now, it would be a new war. However, this wasn't the most important reason. The most important reason was that the orcs now had more important things to do than fighting a war. After all the orc warriors returned to their camps, they solemnly knelt down in front of Jilin like a tide. Even the warriors at the back didn't know what was going on. However, they quickly knelt down after hearing the explanation of their companions. There wasn't a trace of hesitation or struggle. When the Megalosaurus appeared, all the beasts bowed down to it. This didn't mean that the orc warriors had no dignity. Instead, it was because the status of a dragon among the orcs was no different from that of a god. This was the same as the people of the Middle Empire worshipping the saints as their ancestors, and the people of the Sami Empire worshipping the god of light. What was there to struggle about? There wasn't any psychological burden at all. This time, even the warlord was startled. The millions of beastmen warriors were like a vast ocean. Just like that, they all knelt down. How magnificent was this scene? A saint from Middle Empire once said that when there were many people, their sweat would form rain, and their sleeves would cover the sky. Sweat would form rain, and their sleeves would form shade. When a million people knelt down, I didn't need to do anything. It was naturally shocking. Although he was the emperor, even the warlord had never made his soldiers kneel in front of 2 armies, let alone a million warriors. Human soldiers had an extremely high social status during times of war. However, if they didn't kneel in front of the emperor, they only needed to coldly say, "This subject is wearing armor, so it is inconvenient for me to kneel. I hope your majesty will forgive me." In fact, even if they wore armor, so what? Could they really not kneel and salute? That was pure nonsense. Since ancient times, how many defeated generals had knelt down and begged for mercy while wearing armor? Too many to count. Therefore, it wasn't that they couldn't kneel, it was that they didn't want to kneel. They were going to the battlefield tomorrow, and they didn't even know if they could survive the next day. Who cared about the emperor today? It was fine as long as their faces were passable. In the face of such impudent words, not only could the emperor not get angry, he even had to smile and say, "My beloved subject has fought for the country and has contributed greatly. There is no need to stand on ceremony." As for the generals who led the soldiers, they were even more impressive. There is even a saying like, when a general is away, the emperor's orders are not always followed. The warlord narrowed his eyes and looked at Jilin. He knew that from this moment on, the Red Disaster's threat to the human race had become even greater. Even Jilin was shocked by this scene. He gently raised his hand towards the orcs. The orc army, which was like a black sea, stood up and rose. Just a simple move of his hand was enough to make millions of creatures rise and fall. At this moment, Jilin really felt like a god. There was only one person present who wasn't affected by the pressure caused by millions of people kneeling and standing up in unison. "Hurry up and say something. Did you get it or not?" The dwarf king bared his fangs and brandished his claws, his eyes about to burst. It looked like he was about to jump up and kick Jilin. At this moment, not only was he not affected by the pressure, but he also didn't care about these millions of people at all. "Please recommend it. Please add it to your collection. Brothers passing by, please add it to your collection. Thank you." Chapter 164. As the saying goes, a single leaf obscures one's vision. But now, the Dwarf King had the dwarf race's long-cherished wish and his own ultimate goal in front of him. At this time, not to mention a million beastmen, even the entire world would turn a blind eye to him. Therefore, he successfully interrupted Jilin's complacency caused by the worship of 10,000 beasts. "You are the Dwarf King?" The Battle King also came back to his senses. Seeing that the Dwarf King was ignoring him, he asked again, "What?" The Dwarf King suddenly turned his head and glared at him. The Battle King took a deep breath in his heart and suppressed the fire in his heart. He thought to himself that he had met someone who was even more arrogant than him today. But there was nothing he could do. If a normal person dared to talk to him like this, they would have died several times over. However, this was the king of the dwarf race. Not to mention anything else, just the dwarf race's forging ability alone was enough for the Battle King to swallow his anger. "I heard that the current Dwarf King led the entire dwarf race to follow the Red Disaster. This king thought it was groundless, but I didn't expect it to be true. The Battle King said, "So what if it's true?" The Dwarf King said, "Following the red disaster is making an enemy of the entire world. This is a path of no return. Sooner or later, you will be smashed to pieces." The Battle King said, "What do you mean?" The Dwarf King asked, "In this king's opinion, you are a wise soldier. You should be able to see this clearly. Why not renounce the darkness and join the light?" This king swears in the name of the Battle King that the Southern Exian Empire will do its best to protect the dwarf race. The Battle King said, "Protect the dwarf race?" The Dwarf King sneered, as expected of the #1 human powerhouse and the emperor of the empire. "This tone of yours is really scary. Right now, your Southern Exian Empire can't even take care of itself, and you still want to covet the strength of my dwarf race? Although the enemy is outnumbered, my Southern Exian soldiers are not inferior in the slightest. My Southern Exian Empire will definitely win this battle." The Battle King's words were powerful and sounded very determined. He had the heroic spirit of looking down on a million beasts as if they were nothing. No one would have thought that the Battle King's heart was full of hesitation. Facing such a situation, the Dwarf King, of course, disdained. When the Snow Wind Empire launched 2 mobile cities to attack the Dwarf Kingdom, the Dwarf King also said the same thing. "Then let me ask you, can you give me your god spirit?" The dwarf asked the Battle King. The Battle Emperor thought for a moment, then slowly shook his head. As a descendant of the gods, he certainly knew what a god spirit was. How could he take out such a thing? "Then can you provide us dwarves with flames that are thousands of degrees?" The Dwarf King asked again. The War King stared blankly, wondering what that thing was. "You don't even have a god spirit, and you don't even have a fire. Then what the hell are you talking about?" The Dwarf King shouted. The Battle King remained silent. He didn't expect the negotiations to fall apart so easily. Moreover, it had fallen apart so decisively, leaving no room for negotiation. While the War King was still in a daze, Jilin appeared in front of the War King with flames all over his body as if he had teleported. He punched out. The Battle King hurriedly shifted his shield. Although it was hurried, the shield perfectly blocked Jilin's punch. There was a loud bang. It was as if the bells of 400 temples rang at the same time. The War King instantly turned into a streak of light. He flew backward and crashed into the human camp. Cries of surprise rang out from the human army. Meanwhile, the orc army was in an uproar. Cheers shook the heavens. "You're trying to poach my people right in front of me." Jilin looked in the direction the War King flew and said fiercely, "Aren't you being a little too arrogant?" Musin suddenly raised his head and stared at Jilin. He exclaimed inwardly, "Could it be that the strongest human being couldn't even withstand a single attack from the Red Disaster's clone? Is the gap between humans and dragons really so huge? Is it so hopeless that there's no way to cross it? Moreover, the Red Disaster used my soaring river fist to send the War King flying." Musin gritted his teeth in hatred. If he wasn't seriously injured and couldn't get up, he would have charged forward and fought the Red Disaster with all his might, regardless of whether it was a moth flying into a flame. Jilin noticed the change in Mu Exian's emotions, so he turned to look at him and waved his fist. "Hey, puncher, how's my punching?" "Oomph, you have both form and spirit. You've already mastered it." Although Musin was furious, he still glared and said this. In this aspect, Musin had never lied. No, he had never lied. "How do you know my soaring river fist?" Musin asked. "Didn't I see you fight it in the city?" Jilin said matter-of-factly, "You've only seen it once, and you've already reached this level?" Musin's voice trembled. "Yes." Jilin smiled and nodded. Musin shook his head and laughed bitterly. "We thought that you were extremely talented in fire magic, so you learned Flay's fireball technique with just one look. Because of this matter, Flay became deranged. However, who would have thought that you would be able to learn even my fist technique so thoroughly? The heavens are so unfair." Jilin looked at the grief-stricken Musin and didn't say anything. He thought to himself, I've also learned the sword technique of the swordsman at the same time, but there's no need for me to explain everything to a puny human like you. Big Brother Moo, it hasn't reached this level yet. A deep voice sounded. The Battle King walked out of the battle formation unscathed. It was hard to imagine that he had been sent flying so far by a dragon's fist. Oh ho! Jilin's eyes lit up when he saw the unscathed Battle King. Jilin looked at the shield in the Battle King's hand and said slowly, "Your shield is pretty good." Of course. The Battle King held the spear in his hand and knocked it against the shield. This is a divine weapon that has been passed down from generation to generation. Divine weapon? Jilin said, the battle god's shield? That's right. The Battle King said proudly. This is a divine weapon that only those with the bloodline of the Zhan family can use. Oh, Jilin immediately sighed in disappointment. He had already thought of snatching it by force just now. The Battle King looked at Jilin, his eyes full of battle intent and provocation. After taking a direct hit from Jilin, he felt that this legendary enemy, who was as powerful as a god, wasn't so powerful that he couldn't defeat him. I'm not fighting anymore. Jilin looked at the Battle King and said calmly. Through that exchange, Jilin naturally felt that this human was stronger than the guy Mingyue and Staya when they were in their divine general state. He truly lived up to his title as the strongest human. Jilin felt that if he fought the Battle King in his current state, he could win, but it would be a stalemate. He couldn't be bothered to waste his energy on that. That's not up to you. The Battle King raised his foot and slowly walked forward. With every step he took, his aura rose. The battle god's projection in the sky became clearer. This isn't a wise decision, Jilin said. You know that this is only one of my clones. Even if there's a miracle and you can really win against me with your life on the line, so what? It's completely meaningless. The Battle King didn't say anything. He just held a shield in front of him and propped his spear on it. He aimed it at Jilin and approached Jilin step by step. He wasn't fast, but he was very steady. The Battle King's movements looked very ordinary, like an ordinary shield bearer advancing. His aura was firmly locked onto Jilin. It wasn't that he didn't understand Jilin's words, but he still decided to fight without hesitation. From the Battle King's point of view, this fight wasn't as meaningless as Jilin had said. Fighting was the most direct and fastest way to understand an enemy. During a fight, one could understand the opponent's attacking habits. One could know which hand the opponent was used to using and which leg he used first. Experienced warriors could even understand the opponent's thoughts, personality, and so on. This was all information about the enemy. The value of information about the Red Disaster to humans was self-evident. Right now, this was probably the only chance to fight against the Red Disaster in a battle of equal strength. It couldn't be missed. The Battle King silently thought to himself. Foolish human. Jilin shook his head and sighed. Even if it's just a clone, the dignity of a dragon isn't something you can tarnish. Jilin shouted at the warlord in a deep voice, and his frivolous appearance from before was completely wiped away. His voice suddenly became majestic and loud, deafening. His words reverberated between heaven and earth, as if the world itself was repeating his words. The Battle King looked at Jilin, who was suddenly engulfed in flames, and suddenly became majestic and holy like a god. The Battle King silently thought to himself, just what kind of enemy is humanity facing? This thought flashed through his mind, and the Battle King began to charge forward. The projection in the sky also moved with him. The entire earth rumbled. The power of a god was just that great. Even a tiny bit of it, which had been passed down through countless generations, could still shake heaven and earth. For the Battle King, as long as it was an enemy, no matter how powerful they were, he could only fight. Even the Red Disaster was no exception. This was a very simple matter. It had nothing to do with courage or glory. It was just a basic principle. Only by fighting could they win. If they didn't fight, they would definitely lose. Although the Battle King knew that even if they fought, they might not necessarily win, there were so many humans. As long as they kept fighting, they would eventually win. This was the principle and belief of humanity. This was the first time humanity and the Red Disaster had fought in a battle of equal strength, and they weren't being one-sided. This was the first true battle between humanity and the Red Disaster. The Battle King felt that it was very appropriate for him to start this battle. In every aspect, a bright golden light shone from every part of the Battle King's body. This was the Battle King's battle intent. It was being displayed through the battle god's armor. This was a light that soared into the heavens. Thank you for your recommendation tickets. Thank you. Chapter 165. The warlord was charging forward with the resolution to die 9 times, but not regret it. He was in high spirits, and his momentum was at its peak. However, as a member of the Dragon Clan, Qi Lin was born with an incomparable arrogance. How could he tolerate a human flaunting his prowess in front of him and not retaliate? The flames burning on Qi Lin's body surged up with a tongue sound. It made him look like a human-shaped torch. An obvious sense of impatience began to spread from Jilin's body. Everyone could feel the temperature clearly rising. Some of the human soldiers near Jilin couldn't help but lick their dry lips. It was as if the weather had instantly changed from spring to summer. Jilin only used one clone to raise the temperature of the entire area. The temperature around Jilin reached an unimaginable level, so much so that the air above Jilin's head started to distort due to the high temperature. The distortion started to become bigger and more obvious. It was as if something was about to tear open space and crawl out from within, until a red golden-eyed megalosaurus appeared above Jilin's head. This megalosaurus was majestic and ferocious, as if it was alive. This was Jilin's heaven and earth avatar. That was himself. Previously, on the mountaintop, he and Aisha had praised Sing and Muzin's heaven and earth avatar when they saw it. Aisha had asked him, "You can't do it?" Jilin had replied, "I haven't tried." It wasn't that he couldn't do it, but that he hadn't tried. Now that he had tried it a little, it was easy. Compared to Muzin, Sing, and the warlord, Jilin's avatar was a little too realistic. Even the edges of the megalosaurus's scales could be seen clearly. Not only that, but there was also a trace of spiritual energy that seemed to be alive. The dragon's roar resounded through heaven and earth as it roared at the warlord avatar. A great battle was about to break out. However, there was a short person who had been temporarily forgotten by the crowd. He gritted his teeth and cursed. Then he took out something from his pocket and aimed it at the Battle King. "Don't move." The Dwarf King roared, shaking the heavens and the earth. The Battle King, whose momentum had been rising rapidly and was charging forward smoothly, suddenly came to a halt. It was very sudden. It was as if a piece of music was being played smoothly, but it stopped abruptly at a certain point. It made her feel awkward. The Battle King was charging forward with the conviction that he had to fight. Naturally, he wouldn't stop for no reason. The reason for this was because he felt a sense of danger. It was a life-threatening crisis. At the level of the Battle King, warriors who had been on the battlefield for a long time generally believed in their intuition. They called it divine intuition and ghostly intuition. But in the eyes of outsiders, it was the embodiment of decisiveness. The Battle King instantly sensed the danger coming from below. The Battle King looked down and saw the Dwarf King pointing a black iron pipe half the length of a palm and 2 fingers thick at him. The danger came from this iron pipe. The Battle King thought to himself, what was this thing? The Battle King had never seen it before, but he knew that he couldn't let his guard down, because in this world, there weren't many things that could give him a sense of danger, be it people or objects, many years ago. But now, the Red Disaster was one, and so was this iron pipe. The Battle King stared at the iron pipe and hid behind a shield. The sense of danger was still like a knife at his back, and it didn't weaken in the slightest. Even the Battle God's shield couldn't block this iron pipe. When the Dwarf King took out this black iron pipe, even Jilin couldn't help but tilt his head back. What was this thing? How could it be so powerful? With Jilin's eyesight, he only needed an instant to clearly see the dense patterns engraved all over the iron pipe. Those were magic arrays. They were magic arrays that had been shrunk to the extreme. But Jilin couldn't clearly see how many magic arrays were engraved on the small iron pipe, because those magic arrays were all interlocked, and their auras were connected. It was similar to the Four Saints formation and the universe formation of the Middle Empire. "What is this thing?" the Battle King asked as he looked at the iron pipe. "What?" The Dwarf King's tone was extremely arrogant. "You think you have a treasure passed down from your ancestors? My dwarf race has also been passed down for thousands of years. How could it be inferior to yours?" The Dwarf King's expression was extremely ferocious, and there was even a hint of madness in his expression. His words were also a little incoherent. It looked like the matter of the divine spirit had really provoked him. "All of you, do you think you can look down on me just because you have a higher cultivation base? Can't you see that I'm talking to him? What's there to fight about?" The Dwarf King pointed his iron rod at all the legend-rank powerhouses present, but in the end he still pointed at the warlord. "I'm telling you, this thing is the pinnacle of my dwarf race's 1,000-year history. It has been passed down for countless generations, and not a single dwarf king was willing to use it. Today, I'm going all out for this divine weapon. Come, Battle King, you can try to touch me. I'll show you humans the power of my dwarf race." Although the Battle King was fuming with anger, he didn't move. If it was a one-on-one battle, the Battle King might have the courage to personally experience the supreme masterpiece of the dwarf race. However, there was an evil dragon watching from the side, so he didn't dare to take the risk. "Are we still fighting?" The Dwarf King looked at Jilin and asked. "No." Jilin smiled slightly, and the phantom of the megalosaurus in the sky dissipated like bubbles. "Do you still want to stop me? Human?" The Battle King was expressionless and didn't say anything. The situation on the battlefield was constantly changing. When the Dwarf King took out such a powerful weapon without any warning, he had already lost a chance to compete fairly with Jilin. The current situation was, either they didn't fight. If they fought, they would definitely lose. And it was the kind of loss where they couldn't even fight back. This wasn't what the Battle King wanted. "Retreat." Jilin waved his hand at the orc army, and his voice clearly rang in the ears of every orc warrior. The orc army immediately fell into chaos. The orcs were bewildered and looked at each other. Whispers spread throughout the army. What was going on? Why were they retreating? Didn't the prophecy say that when the megalosaurus appeared, the orcs would rise and attack the humans? Why did the megalosaurus give the order to retreat? Wasn't he supposed to lead us to kill all the humans? Why do we have to listen to the megalosaurus orders? He was only a god in the prophecy, a symbol. It was said that he was now the new orc king. That was truly the will of the heavens. Then should we retreat? Let's see. Similar discussions could be heard everywhere in the orc camp. Two people whispering to each other was called whispering. Millions of people whispering to each other was called a war cry in the human language. Looking at the turbulent orc army, Singh broke out in cold sweat. He knew that once the orcs were hot-blooded, they would do anything, because he was also an orc. However, Jilin's face was full of indifference. He almost had the words, "A million orc soldiers are nothing," written on his face. He didn't say anything else. He just turned to look at the warlord, stretched out his finger, and drew a line on the ground. Between the warlord and Jilin, a wall of fire rose from the west and went east. It separated the warlord and Jilin, and it also separated the orc army and the human army. The wall of fire couldn't see the end of it. No one knew how long the line that Jilin casually drew was. The wall of fire was 5 meters tall. From the orc's point of view, it was like an entire world was isolated by the flames. Jilin casually looked at a broken weapon on the ground. With a hook of his finger, the weapon automatically flew into Jilin's hand. Jilin casually threw the half-broken spear into the wall of fire. Before the spear entered the wall of fire, it was already deformed by the high temperature. After entering the wall of fire, it instantly melted into a pool of molten iron. The molten iron passed through the wall of fire and fell to the ground with a plop. Gasps could be heard from both the human and orc camps at the same time. Both sides didn't lack powerhouses with excellent eyesight. They all told this to their companions who couldn't see clearly. Just like that, the news spread like wildfire. Everyone knew how terrifyingly high the temperature of the wall of fire was. If you still want to fight, you can fight on your own. If you don't want to fight, go home. Jilin faced the orc army and said loudly. The Beastman warriors looked at each other one after another. They all had the same thought in their minds. What's the point of fighting? Thank you for your subscriptions and recommendation tickets. Thank you so much. Chapter 166. Brother Mu, get up. The warlord walked to Mu Xian's side and bent down to help him up with his only remaining arm. After Mu Xian got up, he waved at the warlord to show that he was fine. Then, he looked at the wall of fire in silence. What's wrong, Brother Mu? The warlord asked with concern. In his impression, Mu Xian had rarely been so depressed. Muzin looked at the wall of fire that seemed to cover half of the world and was silent for a long time. After a long while, he sighed and said, as a legendary level person, I should be extremely confident, but now I feel that my chances of winning are slim. Yes, he's too strong. The warlord nodded. But we have no choice. We can only fight. That's true. Let's retreat first. It seems like the orcs won't make any big moves for the time being, the warlord said. We're not prepared for this war, but it seems like they're the same. Once both sides are fully prepared, I wonder what kind of scene the war will be like. What else can we prepare? Mu Xian turned to look at the southern Xian army and adventurers who were armed to the teeth. If it was in the past, even if the southern Xian Empire wanted to unify the world and start a world war, they would only be able to do so much. This was probably the extent of the strength that they could bring out. There's no other way. The warlord clenched his teeth as if he had made a huge decision. Let the Iron Blood King carry out his plan. At worst, my Nanshin Empire will just lend a hand. Although it sounded a little risky, there's no other way. What about the Golden King's plan? Mu Xian asked. Let's wait. The warlord hesitated. Let's retreat first. Oh, right. Brother Mu, there's something I forgot to tell you. What? Mu Xian was stunned and replied casually. Mu Yinshan is dead. Who? Mu Yinshan? How'd he die? Did he die in battle? He was the only child in the Mu family who could read books. Is this considered an advantage in the Mu family? Things are precious when they're rare. Then he sighed. Forget it. If he's dead, then he's dead. How'd he die? As a legendary powerhouse, even if Muzin didn't seem to be very smart, he actually didn't lack great wisdom and had long become indifferent to life and death. After returning from the battlefield, he was killed while escorting his comrades. He didn't die on the battlefield. Muzin's anger flared up again. Who dares to plot against my Mu clan's disciples behind the battlefield? I didn't know before, but judging from the current situation, it should be the Red Disaster. Mu Xian was speechless. Then, he sighed and said, so be it. You mean to say that the god soul is right next to your body, but you can't destroy the god's body, so you can't get it? The Dwarf King made a precise summary of what Jilin had just said. That's right. Jilin was a little surprised that the Dwarf King could grasp what he meant so clearly. Even you can't destroy it. The Dwarf King stared at Jilin and asked, are you sure? Aisha was a little worried that the Dwarf King's eyes would pop out again. Of course I tried, Jilin said. How did you try? You really used all your strength. The Dwarf King seemed to be unable to accept that there was something in this world that Jilin couldn't destroy. Or rather, he couldn't accept that the god soul was right next to him, but he couldn't get it. It was enough to make him go crazy. I even used Dragon's Breath. Jilin spread his hands. Dragon's Breath? Every dragon's strongest skill, Jilin said. Then you didn't try it? The Dwarf King asked. I already closed my mouth. Jilin was also very annoyed. That thing, I can't even bite it. The Dwarf King was stunned for a moment and looked at Jilin with a strange look. It seems that you really tried your best. Jilin frowned and looked at the Dwarf King puzzledly. He thought to himself, what do you mean? Is that thing really that hard? The Dwarf King still didn't give up. Nonsense, that's the body of a god. Jilin said. Then why did you suddenly come to me? The Dwarf King asked. Do you have a solution? Yes, Jilin said in a deep voice. The Dwarf King suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. It was good that there was a solution. If Jilin said that there was no solution, he was afraid that the Dwarf King would be driven crazy. Then, the Dwarf King changed the topic. The matter of the god soul was temporarily over, and he finally had time to care about other things. What's wrong with this human saintess? Can she still be saved? In fact, the Dwarf King's real thought was that this person only had half a breath left, and if she swallowed it at any time, she would die. Was it necessary to drag her everywhere? It should be possible. Jilin was also a little uncertain. Who exactly is it? You beat her up to this state under the two of your eyes? The Dwarf King said in incomparable puzzlement. There shouldn't be such a strong person in this world. That's not it. It's her own brain. She insisted on fighting with me, and I had no choice but to fight. Jilin had a speechless expression on his face. I see. The Dwarf King nodded in understanding. In this way, everything made sense. It was you who beat her up to her last breath. If that's the case, why are you still dragging her everywhere? Nonsense. Jilin was also anxious. My dragon race has never hurt a princess. I didn't hit her. I just didn't fight back when she hit me, and I didn't talk back when she scolded me. She was suffering from the backlash of her divine power. If it's just the backlash of the divine power, it shouldn't be to this extent. The Dwarf King was indeed the patriarch of a race with thousands of years of inheritance. He was very experienced and knowledgeable. He was even very clear about such a mysterious thing as God's descent. She also used a skill called sacrifice. Jilin said, "Sacrifice?" The Dwarf King exclaimed. "That's a way to fight without leaving any leeway." It is said that after the people of the Church of Light used sacrifice, no one survived. This girl really hates you. No, according to her, it's for the peace of all human beings. It's a mess. Jilin said, "Oh, it's very much like the style of the Church of Light." The Dwarf King thoughtfully said, "It's very fake." You think so too? When Aisha heard the Dwarf King belittle the Church of Light, she suddenly became interested. Compared to the Church of Light, the matter of the dwarf race replacing the witches in the Snow Wind Empire could only be regarded as a trivial matter. It was not worth mentioning. That's right. The Dwarf King said, "Look at the skills of the Church of Light. Using it once will cause the death of more than 90 people. Using it once will cause a certain death. How is this the Church of Light? I think it's more like a cult. No, just based on this attitude of using human lives as a bargaining chip. The Church of Light is more of a cult organization than any other cult organization. It's this kind of cult organization that is full of love and light. Isn't it fake?" What you said is so right. Aisha's expression was not only excited, but also radiant. For the first time, she felt that the dwarf race was so cute, so simple and honest. Every word he said happened to coincide with her. They were all good people, just like that. In this boundless wasteland at the southernmost tip of the continent, the Church of Light, which had existed for countless years and always released a dazzling light without a trace of haze, was defined as an evil cult by the most evil witch and the Dwarf King who sang the same tune. What about that human teenager? The Dwarf King asked, "Did he also go crazy and fight with you, and then let you accidentally kill him?" "He's in the Middle Empire, and I left him there. But I think there shouldn't be any problem." Jilin said, "When I get the God Spirit and my real body comes back, I will go and pick him up. Since you can't break the God's body, then how will you get the God's Spirit?" The Dwarf King's expression suddenly became very serious. "I said that there are human weapons everywhere in that place," Jilin said. "What's so special about human weapons?" The Dwarf King expressed his disdain. In his heart, he thought that in front of the dwarf race, human weapons were nothing. "It's the moving puppet that fought me on top of the moving city back then," Crimson Scale said. "Ming Shui God weapon." The Dwarf King's voice was trembling. "Yes, they're everywhere. Ming Shui God weapon." "Yes." Jilin nodded first, then thought for a while and added, "They're all broken." "Then you." The Dwarf King was suddenly a little confused. He knew that Jilin would not mention this thing for no reason. But the problem was that he did not know the meaning of a pile of broken things. "Ming Shui God weapon. Can you repair it?" Jilin asked. When the Dwarf King heard this, he suddenly raised his head, and his eyes suddenly lit up, as if there was a little spark slowly burning in his eyes. "Yes. Thank you for your recommendations, subscriptions, favorites. Thank you." Chapter 167. Jilin asked the Dwarf King if he could repair the bright snow godly weapon. The Dwarf King didn't hesitate at all. He was even a little excited as he simply said, yes. But in fact, the Dwarf King had never come into close contact with the bright snow godly weapon, not to mention repairing it. The bright snow godly weapon was the top secret of the Snow Wind Empire. Naturally, outsiders were not allowed to pry into it, but the Dwarf King still said so. Firstly, it was because the Dwarf King had absolute confidence in the dwarf race and absolute disdain for humans in this domain. If you humans can create it, how can my dwarf race not be able to repair it? This was the true portrayal of the Dwarf King's heart. Secondly, the Dwarf King knew that repairing the bright snow godly weapon was imperative. No matter what, it had to be done. After hearing Jilin's words, he knew that Jilin planned to use the bright snow godly weapon that was everywhere in that world to destroy the godly body, just like what the humans did countless years ago. The Dwarf King felt that this was feasible and very reliable. There was no reason why he and Jilin could not do what the humans did countless years ago. It was just following their example. There was nothing difficult about it. The only difficulty in this matter was whether or not he could repair the clear snow divine weapon. In the eyes of the Dwarf King, this was not a problem. Although the million-strong army came with a ferocious aura, they were of the same mind. But when they retreated, they could not just disperse, because there were still many things that needed to be done. For example, the post-war pacification work, the treatment of the wounded, rewards based on merit, pensions, and so on. The Beastmen army settled down in a large open space for 2 days. For these matters, they even built a high platform. On the high platform, there was a throne that was filled with a wild aura. Jilin sat on the throne, motionless like a stone statue. Singh stood in front of Jilin and gave a stirring speech on behalf of him. The general content was that they would one day occupy the humans' land. Today, they were just letting them off and let them linger on for 2 more days. Everyone should go back and recharge their energy. When the next day comes, they would kill all of them. There was one person sitting on the stage and one standing. The audience below the stage was filled with people. These were only 1 or 2 representatives chosen from each tribe. Even so, they still filled the empty space in front of the stands. Jilin was clearly the Beast King, but it was Singh who was speaking with assurance. Jilin and the people below the stage didn't find anything wrong with this. Only Singh felt a little awkward. For rulers like Singh and Jilin, other than work, the most important thing after the war was some numbers. That was the casualty statistics. The result was beyond Jilin's expectations. Previously, when he and Aisha were standing on top of a mountain overlooking the battlefield, even Jilin felt that it was incomparably grand. On the other hand, the beastmen on the battlefield looked like they were dying. In short, it was very casual. Jilin had thought that the beastmen race would suffer heavy casualties after this battle, and their vitality would be greatly damaged. In the end, when he took a look at the casualty statistics that Singh handed over, he realized that it was not the case at all. On the battlefield, countless beastmen died like ants. Not even 1/20th of the total number of beastmen were left. Not to mention a great injury to his vitality, it could not even be considered as a serious injury to his bones. I really didn't expect this. We actually only lost so few people. Jilin clicked his tongue in wonder. Singh instantly looked at Jilin with a strange expression, as if he had accidentally swallowed a fly. He thought to himself, "What are you saying, my king? Are you thinking that there are too many beastmen and too few of them died?" "It ended too quickly," Singh said. Singh said, "For a war like this, which involves millions of people, I thought that it would take more than 10 days for the outcome to be decided. Even if we entered a state of total war, I'm afraid that it would take 1.5 days. This time, we only fought for less than half a day. It can only be considered a greeting. There are still many tribes that didn't even go to the front line. You knew this, so why did you end up in the battlefield so early?" The Dwarf King asked, "Is it really because of that diamond-level human? Other than you, no one else can deal with the beastmen?" Singh was silent for a while and didn't speak. On the other hand, Jilin raised his hand and patted him on the shoulder. He said, "I know that you've been brooding about losing to me and still being alive. But you can't die now. Besides, it's a matter of course that you lost to me. You don't have to take it to heart. It's not shameful. Sing's lips moved. He wanted to say something, but he didn't know where to start. There were thousands of thoughts in his mind, but the clearest one was, "My king, is this how you comfort people? Also, who taught you to use this idiom?" In the end, Sing didn't say anything. He just nodded his head in pain and then left the tent. He still had a lot of things to do. Now, although Jilin was the Beast King in name, the specific affairs of the Beast King had always been done by Sing, and Jilin didn't have the slightest intention of accepting it. Sing carried the unprecedented title of the previous Beast King and did the work of the Beast King. He felt that it was a bit of loss. After Sing left, the only ones left in the tent were Jilin, the Dwarven King, Aisha, and Staya, who seemed to be there or not. Jilin glanced at the calm Staya and shook his head. Previously, Sing had also invited the priest to take a look at Staya's injuries. He hoped that the orcs would be able to help in this matter, since the humans' medical skills were useless, and that their own witchcraft would be useful. However, the eagle-headed priest glanced at Staya with his innate divine eyes and asked in a low, muffled voice, "Why aren't you burying the corpse?" It was all thanks to Sing's quick reflexes that he pushed this person out. Otherwise, Qi Lin would have to do it himself. Now, we should talk about the Ming Shui divine weapon. Jilin looked at the Dwarf King and said, "You should have done this long ago," the Dwarf King said. In a world filled with endless yellow deserts, there was a small red that was very conspicuous on the yellow earth. That was Jilin's real body. He was lying on the highest peak of this world and sleeping very quietly. Even his breathing was so soft that it was almost inaudible. He was like a rock that would never wake up. However, whenever the yellow sand that was floating in this world landed on Jilin's scales, it would instantly evaporate without leaving a trace. Suddenly, Jilin opened his huge eyes and revealed a pair of dazzling golden vertical pupils. Jilin stretched his body and flapped his wings. It looked like he was stretching, but it caused a gust of wind in this world. Jilin pointed at an empty spot on the ground and hooked his finger. A Ming Shui divine weapon that was missing a right leg and half a head emerged from the thick yellow sand. In less than a breath's time, it flew to the highest peak of this world and arrived in front of Jilin. Jilin reached out and caught the Ming Shui divine weapon. His other hand turned into a series of afterimages and brushed the Ming Shui divine weapon back and forth. His expression was very serious. It was like a human child playing with a long-awaited doll that his parents had just bought for him. Not long after, the Ming Shui divine weapon turned into a pile of the smallest parts in Jilin's hands and could no longer be separated. Jilin's golden eyes looked at the pile of parts in his hands and was in a daze. Beastman Camp, Big Tent. Jilin, in his human form, began to draw in the air with his finger. Every time his finger moved, it would leave a thin red line in the air. The Dwarf King didn't know what Jilin was drawing at first and felt that it was really strange, until Jilin finished drawing the 34th part of Jilin. The Dwarf King opened his eyes wide and revealed the most shocked expression. His mouth opened and closed without any meaning. Until Jilin finished drawing all the parts, the Dwarf King still didn't make any sound. After Jilin finished the last stroke, he looked at the Dwarf King and asked, "Did you see it clearly?" The Dwarf King nodded. Jilin also nodded and clapped his hands. The red parts in the air began to gather in the middle. They began to rotate and assemble. In an instant, a red Ming Shui divine weapon that was missing half a head and a leg appeared in front of the Dwarf King. It was exactly the same as the Ming Shui divine weapon that Jilin disassembled in that world. "How is it?" Jilin asked. "No, you can disassemble it again." The Dwarf King glanced at the assembled Ming Shui divine weapon. Jilin waved his hand, and the assembled Ming Shui divine weapon was disassembled into countless parts. They floated around the Dwarf King. The Dwarf King looked at these parts in a circle and then began to exclaim in admiration. "Strange, it's really strange, it's really ingenious. It's really hard to imagine that with the level of humans, they could have such a weapon countless years ago. No, this should be a miracle. Yes, this must be a miracle. God must have told the humans how to forge the Ming Shui divine weapon. It must be. The Dwarf King pulled Jilin and pointed to one of the parts. He said with a trembling voice, "Look, this part looks ordinary, but I have never seen such a shape. It's really amazing. It's like opening a new path. Do you know what this means?" "How would I know?" Jilin waved away the Dwarf King's hand and pointed to the part and asked, "You said you have never seen it before." "Yes." The Dwarf King nodded excitedly. "If you haven't seen it before, can you still fix it?" Jilin roared. The Dwarf King thought that he had covered his ears immediately, but he still felt very painful. He couldn't help but stare at Jilin. "Yes, but it will take time." "How long?" Jilin asked. 3 days. "Then what do you need me to do?" "Get out." The Dwarf King pointed at the entrance of the tent. "I thank you for your collection. Subscription, thank you." Chapter 168. He was driven out of the house, and in his own house at that. This was the first time that Jilin had encountered something like this. But even someone as strong as Jilin could not do anything. He could only walk out of the tent dejectedly. This could be called being forced by circumstances. Jilin walked out of the orc tent, but he did not go far. Instead, he found a flat rock and sat on it. He looked at the curtain of the tent. He was guarding the door. Since the Dwarf King asked him to come out, he naturally did not want others to go in. Now, Jilin was able to understand some of the human subtext, but after sitting on the rock for a long time, Jilin suddenly felt that this was a bit dog-like. He found Aisha and set up a total of 6 mazes around the tent. This was to ensure that no one could break into the tent by accident. Under Jilin's careful attention, the Dwarf King's achievements were remarkable. 3 days later, the Dwarf King called Jilin, Aisha, and Sing to the front. He seemed to be showing off as he casually connected the complicated floating parts that made Sing dizzy. After a while, a broken bright snow god weapon that was missing half a head and a leg appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Aisha nodded repeatedly as she looked. She thought to herself, "No wonder the dwarf race can replace the witches. He is indeed extraordinary." Sing thought, the difference between different races is actually so big. Just this alone, I'm afraid the orcs will never be able to learn it. Only Jilin looked at it for a long time and asked in bewilderment, "That's it? You've only done this in 3 days." Jilin waved his hand, and the assembled bright snow god weapon once again turned into countless small parts. With another wave of his hand, the parts once again assembled the bright snow god weapon. One dismantled, one set in the blink of an eye, and there was no difference. Jilin completed such a shocking operation casually, then looked at the Dwarf King in a daze. The meaning was very clear. "What use do I have for you?" The Dwarf King only felt that he had suffered a great humiliation. He didn't say anything else as he deftly removed the clear snow divine weapon's breastplate and fiddled with it. After a while, the Dwarf King looked up at Jilin and asked, "Do you remember how I moved just now?" Jilin looked at the Dwarf King with disdain and didn't say anything. It was only natural for dragons to have a photographic memory. "Move like I did just now, and then inject energy into it. Try it," the Dwarf King said. When he said try, he naturally wasn't trying to test the red shadow in front of him. Instead, it was a real bright snow divine weapon from another world. In another world, Jilin used his extremely large fingers to easily remove the bright snow divine weapon's breastplate with a jaw-dropping dexterity. His fingertips moved back and forth in the chest of the clear snow divine weapon. His position was exactly the same as the Dwarf King's. He waited until everything was done. Jilin injected visible red energy into a circular device on the left side of the bright snow divine weapon's chest. That was the core of the bright snow divine weapon. Only now did Jilin vaguely believe the Dwarf King's words. The bright snow divine weapon was a miracle. It was the technology of God. Because this thing was too similar to the human body structure, it was exactly the same. It could even be said that humans and the bright snow divine weapon were designed from the same blueprint. Only God would have such a creative habit. Just as Jilin was looking at the bright snow divine weapon's body and thinking about the relationship between God, human, and bright snow divine weapon, suddenly, the only eye of the bright snow divine soldier that was missing half a head lit up. The red light passed through the cold metal eye, but it emitted a lifelike temperature. At this moment, this bright, snow-divine weapon seemed to have suddenly come alive. Compared to the bright snow-divine weapon of the Snow-Wind Empire, this one obviously had more of a living feeling. Jilin thought silently. At the same time, he confirmed his conjecture in his heart. Giving life to a dead object was also the habit and power of God. Jilin looked at the red-eyed, bright snow-divine weapon in front of him. The huge dragon head gave a sinister and fearful smile. He raised his head and looked into the distance. His eyes were very deep. It was as if he could see through the endless space and see what he wanted to see. That direction was the direction of God. If this world was a game created by God, then it shouldn't be a problem for him to play it, Jilin thought in his heart. Middle Empire. Now that it was already autumn, the entire capital was covered in a golden coat. The imperial palace, which was already resplendent and magnificent, now looked like the legendary heavenly palace. A gust of autumn wind blew, and countless branches in the palace swayed and rustled. The leaves fell down one after another, as if it was a golden rain. It added another layer of color to the palace. Therefore, when God is about to bestow a great responsibility on a man, he must first suffer his will, work his muscles and bones, starve his skin, empty his body, and disturb his actions. Therefore, he must endure and do what he cannot. Once a man has passed, he can change. An old and vigorous reading voice sounded in the imperial garden. It was accompanied by the sound of flowing water, as if it had the power to cleanse people's hearts. The leader of the Middle Empire's literary world, Ouyang-ju, was sitting on a stone bench next to Shiyu Waterfall and giving a lecture. Ouyang-ju, who was already old, had not taught a class for nearly 20 years. If people knew that the old man was teaching again, there would definitely be countless scholars flocking to him. The entire literary scene of the Central Empire would definitely be shaken by this. However, what should have been a grand lecture was now only one student and two people listening. That student was not even from the Middle Empire. Ouyang-ju had been teaching Bane for more than half a month. The reason was that Mr. Ouyang believed that the Middle Empire's greatest strength was still the teachings of the saint. Things like instigating people around the Red Disaster should be done by scholars like himself. For people like Sword Saint, although his realm was indeed high, he was still a little rough. Oh no, not instigating, but reforming. Wasn't it his duty as a teacher to help young people who had gone astray return to the right path? Zhuge Zhang and Sword Saint looked at each other. They felt that Mr. Ouyang was indeed the leader of the literary world. Although he was sometimes a little unreliable, he was indeed very knowledgeable. Sword Saint and Prime Minister both enjoyed Mr. Ouyang's lecture and benefited a lot. Only the only student who thought that he was secretly pinching his own thigh, trying his best not to fall asleep. Your Majesty. Golden King and Li Zheng had arrived at the Imperial Garden at some point and seemed to have been standing there for a while. When Prime Minister Zhuge saw this, he calmly stood up and bowed to him. Of the four people present, only he stood up. Sword Saint rolled his eyes at Golden King and didn't say anything. Mr. Ouyang's expression also turned a little ugly, but he ignored Golden King. He felt that His Majesty the Emperor was disturbing his class, although the only student obviously didn't listen. As for Bane, he had been sleepwalking for a long time. He was just barely able to stay awake. Teacher, you're still as elegant as ever. Ouyang-ju didn't bow to Golden King, but Golden King bowed to him instead. Ouyang-ju nodded, which meant that he agreed. It looked like he was really arrogant to the extreme. Sword Saint and Zhuge Zhang didn't find it strange. Instead, they felt that it was natural. Ouyang-ju was the common teacher of all the princes of Li Zheng's generation. Now, he was the emperor's preceptor. His status was very high, and it went without saying. In front of others, Ouyang-ju was a complete supporter of the emperor. In the eyes of the court officials, he was even a little blindly loyal and muddle-headed. He was an old bookworm who only knew how to read. He would agree to whatever the emperor said without any objections. He didn't have any opinions of his own and only knew how to go along. The most hateful thing was that this old guy had a lot of disciples behind him. He had a very high status in the literary world, and he had a lot of support in the court. Often, when the emperor proposed a new policy that wasn't very reliable or a major decision that would be opposed, he would let the eunuch say a long and complicated speech to announce the matter. It was something that could be explained in 1 or 2 sentences, but he had to say 500 to 600 words, and most of it wasn't even human language. After the eunuch finished, the emperor took the opportunity to ask Ouyang-ju before the court officials understood the meaning of the imperial edict. "Teacher, what do you think?" Ouyang-ju didn't know if he understood, but he bowed to the emperor and said loudly, "Your Majesty is wise. This official thinks that Your Majesty is right." Ouyang-ju was the emperor's preceptor, and he was already old. He was also the Minister of Rights, so he naturally stood in the first row in the court. He bowed at the front, and the people behind him all knelt down. They all said, "Your Majesty is wise. Your Majesty is right." Then, this matter didn't need to be discussed. In some people's eyes, Ouyang-ju was the emperor's mouthpiece. However, only a few people knew that ever since Li Zheng ascended the throne, Ouyang-ju had never been nice to the emperor in private. The reason was simple. All the princes of the previous generation were his students. However, after a fight for the throne, most of his students, except for Li Zheng, had a tragic ending. The one who did it was Li Zheng. Therefore, Ouyang-ju was angry when he saw Li Zheng. "Your Majesty," Prime Minister saw that the emperor's expression was a little strange. After hesitating for a while, he made up his mind and asked, "Which prince is it?" 11. The emperor said, "Prince Li Su, thank you for your collections, recommendations, thank you." Chapter 169. Hearing the Prime Minister's question, Ouyang-ju's white eyebrows twitched. Sword Saint couldn't help but sneer. Only Bane's eyes were wide open, indicating that he didn't understand anything. The Prime Minister had followed Emperor Li Zheng for many years, and, as the head of all the officials, he was naturally always by the emperor's side. He only needed a glance to see that the emperor's temples had a few more white hairs, and he looked slightly tired. Then he thought of the various things that happened in the capital these days, and the various signs that it represented with Zhuge Zhan's intelligence. He could easily deduce the truth of the matter from the clues. That was after the 16th prince, Li Wenruan, there was another prince who wanted to usurp the throne, just like how the Prime Minister understood the emperor. The emperor also understood the Prime Minister. He knew that this Grand Secretary, who usually didn't show off and didn't reveal anything, had a lot of wisdom. He also knew that this matter couldn't be hidden from him. Therefore, the emperor didn't want to hide it. Since he asked, he answered. The 11th prince, Li Su, rebelled. Is history like Staya, only repeating itself? Mr. Ouyang looked up at the sky and sighed. Why do different people always do the same thing? Can't they learn from the history of Ika, Gyudel, and Aisha? Sir, not everyone is as hopeless as you. Sword Saint comforted. Only the Li family is so incorrigible. This is an instinct engraved in the blood of the Li family. It's not something that outsiders should know. Sword Saint's words seemed to be comforting Ouyang-ju, but in fact he was mocking the Golden King. And it was extremely sharp. Every word was like a sword. Gai Mingwei was indeed the Sword Saint. No matter what he did, it was filled with sword intent. Mr. Ouyang rolled his eyes at Sword Saint and snorted. He clearly remembered that when Li Zheng fought for the throne, there were more than 2 or 3 princes who died under this sword. How can this be? Zhuge Zhan was confused. 11th prince shouldn't have the ability to rebel, right? Moreover, the timing was not good. All the princes were in the capital now. How could the 11th prince rebel at this time? Even if he succeeds, the tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. With his strength, he won't be able to rise to the top in the end. That is why I am so angry, so disheartened. The emperor picked up the tea on the stone table and drained it in one gulp. Azan, do you remember how brilliant you and I were back then? How wise and resourceful we were. He was able to plan before taking action and was extremely meticulous. He could also charge and break through enemy lines. Invincible. Take a look at these sons of mine. All of them are trash. I really wonder if he's my flesh and blood. Ahem. Ouyang-ju coughed violently. The Golden King was stunned and realized that he had misspoken. He hurriedly bowed to the teacher as an apology. In his heart, he thought that he had really lost his mind because of those useless people. How could he say such things in front of the teacher? That's right. Just by looking at this brainless face of his, I can tell that he's your flesh and blood. You don't have to doubt it. Sword Saint said. How dare you? The Golden King's eyes widened as he roared angrily. What? Did I say something wrong? Sword Saint did not back down at all. Li Zheng, you're the ruler of a country. Please have some dignity. You're saying that you were resourceful back then. Invincible. Bah. Brother Zhuge was the one who came up with the plans, and I was the one who charged and broke through enemy lines. What does that have to do with you? Other than saying that you're going to kill your elder brother today and cripple your younger brother tomorrow. What else have you done? If you ask me, you were just like this son of yours back then. Bane stared dumbfoundedly at Sword Saint, who looked like an old hooligan. He felt that the world had changed. Sword Saint had always been handsome, calm, and quiet in front of others. He did not speak much. He gave off the feeling that he was a sword that had been sharpened for many years and was hidden in its scabbard. Usually, he stood aloof from worldly affairs. However, at critical moments, he would strike with his sword and shock the world. Only in front of the Golden King did Sword Saint suddenly become like an old hooligan. The Prime Minister stood in front of Sword Saint and waved his hand repeatedly, indicating that Master Sword Saint should stop talking. The Minister of Right's face darkened. Moreover, those were the glorious days of Aisha when she was young. A real man does not talk about his past achievements. The Golden King and the Jilin were so angry that their faces turned red. If it was anyone else, aka Gyudel would have been razed to the ground. But this person was Sword Saint, so the Golden King wisely decided to ignore him. Actually, you can't blame Eleven for being so reckless. The Golden King glanced at Bane and sighed. It's really, the Prime Minister also glanced at Bane, shook his head and said, it's also Ik Gyudel. It's really not up to people to decide. Ouyang Xiao closed his eyes to rest, his eyelids twitching. The Sword Saint smiled at him. Bane was a little stunned. He thought to himself, why are you all looking at me? The people of the Middle Empire are simple and honest, and the father is kind and the son is filial. It has nothing to do with me, a person of the Saimai Empire. Bane felt that he was very innocent, but there was an old saying in the Middle Empire. It was called cause and effect. This sentence could also be said the other way around. The Prime Minister, the Emperor, and the Sword Saint, these three people naturally didn't look at him for no reason. There were a total of 18 princes in the Middle Empire, and they were originally scattered all over the empire. But because of the arrival of the Red Disaster a few days ago, the entire Middle Empire was facing a great enemy. For this, the Middle Empire actively prepared many countermeasures. For example, unknowingly evacuating the residents of the capital. For example, recalling the other marshals of the empire to the capital. Another example was the preparation of the Great Cosmos Formation and the Four Saints Formation. Many methods were used at the same time. Summoning the princes back to the capital was just one of the most inconspicuous moves. The main purpose was to prevent the tragedy of the 7 princes from happening again. But no one would have thought that because of a certain youth's hot-headedness, the Red Disaster and the Middle Empire began a head-on confrontation in advance. This directly led to many of the arrangements of the Middle Empire not being completed. Because of this, the Middle Empire was also somewhat caught off guard. After that great battle, the losses were even greater than imagined. So much so that they no longer had the spare energy to care about the little tricks of the princes. Only then did the 11th prince have the illusion that, I can do it. The toad has been staring at the swan for a long time. It's inevitable that he will think that he can reach it if he jumps up. This is understandable. Sir Sword Saint was extremely humorous as he sprinkled salt on the emperor's wound. He vividly described how the 11th prince had overestimated his own capabilities. You can't blame Li Su for this. Mr. Ouyang said aloud. This opportunity can be said to be unprecedented. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It's only natural that he can't help it. Bane's gaze swept back and forth across everyone's faces. He thought to himself, what are these people talking about? Just now, the Prime Minister and the Emperor said that the timing wasn't good, but Mr. Ouyang said that it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The strangest thing was that even though they were clearly talking about different things, these people had an atmosphere of, we're talking about the same thing. Mr. Ouyang saw that Bane was puzzled, so he coughed lightly and prepared to explain. As a teacher, it was basic to impart knowledge and solve doubts. Now, all the princes are in the capital. Facing the throne, they can't help but be restless, Mr. Ouyang said. It's like there are more than 10 wolves surrounding the throne. They're all salivating at the fat piece of meat in the middle. And this piece of meat is being stared at by a dragon. Under such circumstances, it won't be easy for any wolf to eat this piece of meat. That's why the Prime Minister said that the timing isn't good. The Emperor's face was a little bitter. He thought to himself, Sir, you're also a leader in the literary world. What kind of metaphor is this? Can't you say it in a nicer way? Bane nodded with some understanding, then asked curiously, if that's the case, why did you say that it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? Ouyang Ju smiled and said, that's because, for the princes who want to enter the palace, there's a very tempting condition in front of them. This condition is enough to make them overlook a lot of things. It's a heaven-sent opportunity. What is this condition? Bane asked. This condition is, the current palace has no door, Ouyang Ju said. Bane heard this and suddenly opened his eyes wide. He was silent for a long time. He thought to himself, just because of this, the 11th prince rebelled, and this door, it seems like, thank you for your recommendations and subscriptions. I've been a little busy these 2 days. I'm sorry for the lack of updates. Chapter 170. Bane now knew why these people were looking at him. If what Mr. Ouyang said was true, the 11th prince returned purely because the palace door was gone, then he really couldn't get away with this matter. Jilin had blown the door of the Middle Empire's palace away to save him. It's just a door, right? Bane said timidly. Who would rebel just because of a door? Could it be that something that couldn't be done in the first place can be done just because there's no door? This is a rebellion. It can't be so careless. Mr. Ouyang suddenly laughed when he heard this. He looked at Sword Saint and said with a smile, You said that because you don't know how powerful the palace door is. That's the Middle Empire's last line of defense. It's the biggest obstacle to all those who want to usurp the throne. It's like a heavenly barrier, blocking the path of those who are full of ambition. It's just a palace door. Is it really that powerful? Bane asked, What do you think of the Sword Saint's strength? Mr. Ouyang ignored Bane and asked this irrelevant question. Bane pondered for a moment and thought about his situation, then said, If it's just humans, the Sword Saint's strength can be said to be invincible and unfathomable. Lord Ouyang stroked his beard and laughed. Although it's a bit exaggerated, it's not too far off. But even such a powerful Sword Saint could only be helpless when facing that palace door. Oh, Bane's eyes lit up. He didn't expect to hear such a thing. As long as there was a good audience, people would naturally be interested in talking. This was the characteristic of all scholars. When a scholar who thought he was full of talent but couldn't display it, holding a wine glass, holding a table, talking loudly, waving his hand vigorously, and talking loudly. No matter how drunk he was, there had to be someone listening to him so that he could continue talking, right? Back then, Lord Sword Saint said that he would charge into the palace alone with his sword and kill the current emperor to appease the hatred in his heart. The entire nation was shocked. It was a white winter with fine snow floating in the sky. Although it was not heavy, it still covered the ground of the capital with a thin layer of snow. On that day, the entire capital was under martial law, and no one was allowed to go out on the streets. Therefore, on the white vermilion bird street, there was only one person carrying a sword, walking step by step. His sword was colder than snow. The wind was howling, and the water was cold. How carefree and happy was that? How magnificent! The emperor looked at Mr. Ouyang, who was beaming with joy and talking nonstop. In his heart, he thought that even though Mr. Ouyang hadn't told anyone a story for so many years, his ability really hadn't dropped at all back when the emperor was young. Ouyang-ju not only had to talk about knowledge, he also had to tell stories. The Sword Saint indeed walked to the palace gate alone with his sword. Everyone could only watch, and no one dared to step forward to stop him. How heroic! Prime Minister Ouyang's eyelids twitched as he listened. He thought that he was certain that the Sword Saint wouldn't be able to break through the palace's defensive line. That was why he didn't let anyone do anything. What did he mean by no one dared? How was it heroic? However, something unexpected happened. The Sword Saint used all his strength to slash the palace gate 12 times. Each slash was earth-shattering, and its power was unparalleled. However, after the palace gate received 12 slashes from the Sword Saint, it was still intact. In the end, the Sword Saint could only leave helplessly. I only slashed once. When the Sword Saint heard this, he finally couldn't hold it in anymore. He thought to himself, is it a habit of every scholar to exaggerate things? Moreover, if one slash can't cut through something, why do I need to slash it 11 times? I'm not stupid. Bane glanced at the Sword Saint and sighed. So it's that powerful. Of course, it's one of the foundations of the Middle Empire. Not only is it extremely sturdy, but there are also countless arrays carved on it. Prime Minister Ouyang said with a hint of pride, but it's a pity. Yes, it's also because of this that 11 and the others have become so crude. The Golden King also sighed and said, in our time, and for any previous generation of princes, because of the existence of that door, usurping the throne was something that could only be done with wits and not strength. This is something that doesn't need to be said. But now, there's a chance of success in attacking the palace. 11 and the others naturally can't sit still. Yes, choosing to rebel when the palace doesn't have that door is indeed the most normal thing for the princes. It's just like those guys who like to climb mountains and see mountains. Sword Saint said. What does that mean? Bane asked. Sword Saint felt that Bane's words were very accurate, so he smiled and said, in the Simi Empire, there's a saying, why do you climb mountains? Because the mountains are there. Why do you rebel? Because the palace doesn't have a door now. Bane smacked his lips and thought to himself, what's going on? Staya always liked to talk about the saints in the Middle Empire. Now that Sword Saint was talking about a saying in the Simi Empire. What? Can't you talk about something from your own country? To show that you're cultured, right? That foreign monks can chant scriptures, right? Bane thought to himself viciously. Urgent report. Suddenly, a hurried announcement came from outside. The 8th Prince, Li Lu, quickly walked over with an urgent report. When he got close, the 8th Prince knelt down on one knee and raised the urgent report above his head. Reporting to Father, 11th brother has rebelled. Everyone looked at the 8th Prince, then looked at each other. No one said anything. These people were so calm and didn't have any reaction. This made Li Lu a bit unprepared, and he didn't know what to say next. He thought to himself, I know that all of you big shots don't change your expressions even if MT-Tai collapses in front of you, and you're all people with deep thoughts. But at a time like this, can you please give some reaction? Even if it's just pretending. This is a prince rebelling. Get up, the emperor said. We already know about this. Oh, the 8th Prince responded and stood up, thinking to himself, no wonder you're all so calm. 11th Prince Li Su. Ouyang Ju frowned and thought for a moment, then glanced at the Prime Minister. The 11th Prince has been the pacifier of Danzhou in recent years. He has no more than 2,000 soldiers under his command, and he can't come to the capital. The Prime Minister said, Pacifier? The Sword Saint said aloud. Is that even an official? No wonder the 11th Prince is the first to rebel against you. If you were given such a small official position by the late Emperor, you probably wouldn't have been able to hold it in. The Emperor's face darkened. I'm training his temperament. Sir, you just said that heaven is about to give him a great responsibility. Stop right there, the Sword Saint said. Do you think I don't know you? What are you pretending for? Gai Mingwei. The Emperor shouted angrily. I've tolerated you for a long time. I wanted to kill you for a long time too. The Sword Saint completely ignored the Emperor's anger and shouted back. The Emperor was furious as he strode toward the Sword Saint. No one knew what he was going to do. The Prime Minister and Sir Ouyang's eyes widened as they wondered what His Majesty was going to do. Could it be that the 11th Prince's actions? In the end, he still managed to provoke the seemingly calm Emperor? Otherwise, why would the emperor be so unwise? If they really fought, no matter how they fought, the emperor would be the one at a disadvantage. If the emperor of the Middle Empire was beaten up in his own garden, it wouldn't look good. A black shadow suddenly appeared in front of the emperor and stopped him. It was Ing Yi. Compared to the Sword Saint, Ing Yi thought that stopping the emperor was obviously the better choice, even though it was somewhat disgraceful. Ing Yi, kill him. The emperor pointed at the Sword Saint and shouted angrily. Ing Yi blinked and pretended not to hear. Although he was loyal to the emperor, he couldn't bear to listen to these words. Father. The 8th prince looked at the chaotic scene and couldn't help but shout. 11th brother has already brought his men. The emperor heard the 8th prince's words and couldn't help but roll his eyes. He waved his hand and interrupted him. He said with disappointment, You've been by my side for the longest time, but why haven't you learned anything? The 8th prince didn't understand what the emperor meant, but he still said anxiously, Father, 11th brother is really well prepared this time. There was no warning at all. The guards in the capital won't be able to react in time. What if the emperor took a deep breath and wondered if his son was a fool? Why didn't he notice it before? The emperor forcefully suppressed some of his anger and said with a very amiable smile, Old 8, how about I make a bet with you? The 8th prince was stunned. If 11th brother can bring his men into the palace, which is currently closed, then you win. I will immediately announce to the world that you are the crown prince. How about that? The 8th prince's eyes widened and he couldn't say anything. He felt his heart turn upside down. Chapter 171. The emperor of the Middle Empire, Li Zheng, was a legendary figure with foresight. That was the consensus of everyone who knew him. Even Sword Saint thought so, even if he didn't say it. But it was such a far-sighted emperor who had the entire empire in his heart, who had never appointed a crown prince. It had been nearly 30 years since the birth of the first prince. During this time, the officials had advised the emperor countless times to appoint a prince as soon as possible to stabilize the country and stabilize the people's hearts. However, after so many years, their efforts were in vain. Every time, the emperor would say, the matter of appointing a crown prince is related to the foundation of the country and cannot be rushed. It should be carefully considered and considered. I am now in the prime of my life and have many children. My dear officials, there is no need to be anxious. The officials couldn't do anything. The emperor said that he was in good health. Who dared to say anything? At this time, if they were to sing a different tune, wouldn't it be cursing the emperor to die early? However, the emperor was right. He did have many children. Even if 1 or 2 of them died, there was no need to worry about no one inheriting the throne. So after 2 times, the officials didn't insist anymore. But why didn't the emperor appoint a crown prince? This was the question in the hearts of all the officials. No one could understand such an action. However, the emperor who had insisted on not appointing a crown prince for many years said to his 8th son in a joking tone, Let's make a bet. If you win, I will let you be the crown prince. Of course, the 8th prince was stunned. Of course, he was caught off guard. The thing that was out of his reach in the past was now close at hand. He breathed heavily twice, and sweat flowed from his forehead to his cheeks. He wouldn't think that the Golden King was joking just because he was ready to fight with Sword Saint like a gangster. He wouldn't think that the Golden King was just joking. After all, it was the basic principle of every emperor to keep his word. He calmed down and looked at the people around him in a daze. It didn't matter what he saw, but his originally high-spirited heart suddenly sank. Because in his eyes, except for Bane, who was dumbfounded and felt that the Middle Empire was too careless, everyone else was nonchalant, as if they didn't hear what the Golden King said at all. This was too abnormal. The Sword Saint aside, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Rights, who had served for 3 dynasties, were all important officials of the Middle Empire. Logically speaking, they should be kneeling on the ground and kowtowing, begging the emperor to retract his order and prioritize the country. But now, they were all calm and indifferent, as if they were watching a show. What was going on? After calming down, the 8th prince thought about it and felt that he understood. This was because the Prime Minister and Mr. Ouyang both felt from the bottom of their hearts that it was impossible for him to win. In other words, the Prime Minister and Mr. Ouyang felt that it was impossible for the 11th Royal Brothers men to pass through the Vermilion Bird Avenue and pass through the palace gate. Even if there was no door in the palace, they would only be defeated on the way to the palace. In thinking about the Golden King's words carefully, the 8th prince felt even more terrified. If the 11th prince attacked the palace and made him the crown prince, what did this mean? This meant that the emperor thought that even if the sun rose from the west and the 11th prince entered the palace, he wouldn't be able to do anything. He wouldn't be able to stir up any big waves, so it wouldn't be a big deal. The emperor even had the spare energy to make a crown prince. The emperor didn't care about the 11th prince's rebellion at all. Thinking about it, in front of the 8th prince, there were two legendary masters, Ing Yi and Sword Saint. Just these two people alone could probably wipe out the 11th prince's men. The reason why these two people were still standing there was probably because they thought that there was no need to use a sledgehammer to kill a chicken. They were too lazy to make a move. The 8th prince started to feel that the 11th royal brother was a little too reckless. "May I ask, Father, what will happen if I lose?" the 8th prince asked. In the world, there were winners and losers in gambling. If he could win something, then he could lose something. If you lose, the Golden King thought for a while, "You bring my order and bring the 11th prince back to me personally. Don't let your brothers kill him." Like a bolt of lightning striking the southern gate, the 8th prince was scared silly. With a plop sound, he knelt on the ground and said in a trembling voice, "Royal father is here. The royal brothers wouldn't dare." The emperor didn't deny it. He helped the 8th prince up and said softly, "Go." "Yes." The 8th prince answered and hurried out. Although his legs were still weak, he still wanted to hurry to Vermilion Bird Avenue and capture the 11th prince himself. This should be able to protect the 11th prince's life and prevent the tragedy of brothers fighting from happening under the emperor's nose. Although he didn't believe that any prince would dare to kill the 11th prince in front of the palace. However, after following the Golden King for so many years, the 8th prince knew clearly that most of the things that the Golden King said came true. The 11th prince could die, but he couldn't die in the hands of his own brothers. "What? You can't bear it when it's your own child's turn?" the Ouyang Jew asked with a sneer. Every word was heart-wrenching. Back then, he had earnestly advised Li Zheng to be merciful to his brothers and not to kill them all, insisting on putting them to death. However, Li Zheng was unmoved and his methods were still extremely cold. In the end, most of the princes of that generation died. The Golden King didn't say anything because the teacher was right. He had nothing to say. The 11th prince was just the beginning. The Prime Minister said he obviously didn't have any chance of success, but he still rashly started a rebellion. There's only one explanation. He was instigated by the other princes. He might even be testing the waters for the other princes. "I know," the emperor sighed. "As long as this kind of thing starts, it will affect the whole situation. No one will let others watch the fire burn across the river and be the fisherman that benefits from it safely. Therefore, the safest way was to drag everyone down with him. We did the same thing in the past. This kind of thing will happen one after another in the future." The Golden King expressed the most pessimistic view with an experienced tone. But the time is not right. It was rare that the Sword Saint didn't mock the emperor. Instead, he said seriously, "Rebelling at this time will only bring about your own destruction. It's meaningless and your death will be in vain." Anyone who had read history would know that no matter which dynasty, as long as the country's environment was stable, things like princes usurping the throne would definitely happen when the emperor was in his old age and gradually felt powerless. Thus, he began to hand over the power in his hands to the next generation. At this time, the power of the princes would increase. Correspondingly, the emperor's control over the country would become looser. It was only during this period that the princes would have the chance to make a move. However, the Golden King was still in his prime, and his control over the country was still at its peak. In this kind of environment, the princes had no chance at all. The time they took action was 20 years too early. This is the variable. The Red Calamity destroyed the palace door, causing the princes to have wild ambitions. They mistakenly thought that after the empire was attacked by the Red Calamity, its strength was greatly reduced and thought that they had an opportunity to take advantage of it. What a pity. The Prime Minister sighed deeply. The matters of the world were not up to people. The ancients were not lying. The Red Calamity casually destroyed a door, and the Middle Empire fell into chaos. Actually, there's a way to temporarily suppress the foolish actions of your sons. The Sword Saint said. The Golden King didn't say anything. He quietly looked at him and waited for him to continue. That is, you can really appoint a crown prince. Then, you can do your best to support him and suppress the other princes. Tell them that this is the person you want to be the next emperor, and that they have no hope. Calm down, the Sword Saint said. When the Sword Saint finished his first sentence, the Golden King closed his eyes as if he had given up. There is no need to listen to this anymore. This way, the other princes will definitely go crazy. They will disregard everything and stake everything on this. The Prime Minister appeared very nervous. The Sword Saint's words were too serious. Well said, the Sword Saint said casually. Give me that sword, and I'll kill whoever makes a fuss. I guarantee that even the capital won't fall into chaos. When the Sword Saint said this, even Ouyang Ju, who had been resting with his eyes closed, opened his eyes. That sword, you can't touch it. The Emperor's aura suddenly changed. His gaze became incomparably sharp, and the thick aura of an emperor spread out from his body. He stared at the Sword Saint and spoke with a pause between each word, full of dignity. No disobedience. Please recommend, bookmark, subscribe. Thank you, everyone. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.